Okay. Okay, I'll call a meeting to order. Thank you very much to you all for tuning in tonight. I know there are thousands at home who've tuned in to what promises to be a very informative meeting. I want to begin, though, today with a bit of a presentation. It was presented by two young Coquitlam residents. They they live in Coquitlam. They actually go to school in Port Coquitlam, but the border means very little to our residents. These two, Logan Culbert and Luca Camarda, have been raising money for the fire victims up in the interior of British Columbia. They're two of our young citizens, and they've been doing it by selling cupcakes. And so I placed an order online on the Coquitlam River Springs website, and the delivery came today. He wanted $1 each, and I said, well, but there was delivery, so he dutifully raised the price, so that's good. And the money goes, he's raised almost $300 to the for the victims of fire in the interior. We know others in our community have similarly raised money and sent assistance and tried to do what we can as a community and what British Columbians across the province can to help meet the needs of so many thousands of displaced families, so many families who've now lost their homes, lost their businesses. And so on behalf of Council, I send our heartfelt thoughts and prayers to the people of, I won't name the communities because there are so many communities affected, but so many British Columbians that are facing much more smoke than we have graying our skies tonight here in Coquitlam. So I'm going to hand these cupcakes out to my council colleagues. There's chocolate and vanilla, and according to this, they're vanilla, butter, pecan, and double chocolate, so you can choose between those. And I'd like to hand it over to Chief Peerlett, who's perhaps going to describe some of the activities that Coquitlam Fire and Rescue, our personnel and our equipment, have been involved in as we've been called by the province and asked to assist, and as is our community's general response. The answer was yes, and I'll hand it over to Chief Peerlett to describe how.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, Mayor and Council, and to our listening audience. And building on what those two young people did today, selling the cupcakes, it's just a sign of the community we live in, how supportive they are. I am pleased to provide an update of our own efforts to support the state of emergency in the province of BC. Coquitlam Fire Rescue has maintained for a number of years following the 2003 firestorm in Kelowna recommendations to provide special trained staff and equipment called a structural protection unit. It's basically a unit, truck and trailer with sprinklers on it that provides exterior sprinkler protection for homes that are in the fire path. And if I can ask Mr. Clerk just to return to that first photo, you'll get a sense of what the team looks like. It's a 5-person team. They were deployed July 7th to the 100-mile area as it was in the path of the fire. And they got up there as the fire was approaching, and they managed to provide a lot of protection to many of the residences, as well as the local sawmill there as well. And I've got some pictures of that following. But this is very typical. In the foreground, the picture's not that clear, but there's sprinklers, and there's some on the roof of that structure. In the background, of course, you see the forestry helicopter is dropping a bucket load of water to dampen down some of the surrounding areas as well. If we can just move on, next picture. Following that, we deployed a second SPU unit, as they're called, about a week later. And following on that deployment, we also were asked by the province if they could use our tender. And we deployed that just 3 days ago. And we have a 3,000-gallon tanker. It has a unique capability in that it can pump and roll and spray water at the same time. So these tenders help support the sprinkler support units by bringing water and filling up bladders, if you will, so that they can run the sprinklers while the fire is approaching, and then they can leave the area, and hopefully the sprinklers do their job. But in this particular case, the Forestry Service finds this unit particularly useful, and it can also spray and put out spot fires along the roadways, and in fact keep the escape routes open for the sprinkler team. So it's become very valuable. It's currently in the 100-mile area, and it may get redeployed over the next few days, as our sprinkler team has also moved up to the Quesnel area, a little west. They're in Nazco. They're protecting the Carrier First Nations and other critical infrastructure in there at this time. So we've got 2 teams out there, plus the water tender unit. Next picture, if I can, Mr. Clerk. This is a picture at a 100-mile area, 103, I think it is, or 108. There's a sawmill in the foreground, and that fire you see there is actually a purposely lit backburn. The forestry wanted to eliminate the forest fuels around the mill in that area. It's a major employer. They had our team sprinkler the mill and provide the protection in case the fire didn't do what it was supposed to do. Report is that they have removed the forest fuels, and that mill is now protected, and the employment that goes with it in 100 miles. So that's been a real success story there. Next picture, please. This is typical what the team has been finding along the highways, and many of the evacuees and other forestry resources are finding this as well, as the fire seems to migrate at times to the road system. They're very typical what they're traveling in. It's tough for them to breathe. The structural protection unit doesn't use typical firefighter structural breathing protection or personal protective equipment. They're in forestry gear, which is basically coveralls and a helmet and a dust mask. Next picture, please. They had to leave their area, their position. They've been overrun several times, but they had to leave their area one particular night. It was quite dramatic, very similar to what Fort Mac experienced, where this is Highway 97 at 103 mile, and they're heading further north to escape the fire. It was threatening to cut off their position and their escape route. They had to drive through some pretty harrowing conditions, along with other forestry resources. So this is a picture of our campfire. Some of you may have noticed there's been many campfire pictures posted lately with forestry personnel, but this is our campfire picture. And this is a crew watching a fire approach. And behind them, you can't see it, is a resident they protected. And this time of night, things tend to settle down and the winds die down, and so they felt they were able to do that, but they do have an escape route behind them, and they would have got in their trucks and taken off. But this is typically what they do, is they're working 12 to 20-hour days and 14-day deployments, and they just go. The first team, we're making arrangements now. I've got a relief team going up to relieve them in Quesnel, and they'll be leaving tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock or perhaps earlier. I just wanted to close, just remind our citizens we're thankful for the support that we get, and to Mayor and Council for the support you give your fire service so that we can provide this when requested by the province. This does not come at the expense of Coquitlam taxpayers. All costs, equipment and staffing are fully recoverable from the province. And I do want to remind people that here in Coquitlam, we still have available trained staff and provincial equipment should we need to provide similar capabilities here. We are now in day 6 of high, and in conjunction with our partners from Parks and Bylaws and the RCMP, you will start to see uniformed and bylaw officers patrolling your parks and other vulnerable areas. Please cooperate with them. If they ask you to put out your cigarettes, if they ask you to put out the fire that you're not supposed to be burning, we need to keep Coquitlam safe, and you'll see a lot more of our uniform presence out there over the next few weeks. Thank you.
Well, I thank you on behalf of all of Council. I thank you and your team, your staff, your firefighters for their dedication and their commitment to their line of work, their chosen career, but to people of other communities now. And as we do, unfortunately, as we've seen every summer, there is challenges in other parts of the province, and the expertise that we send there is invaluable to those, expertise and equipment is invaluable to those communities, but the expertise and experience that our firefighters come back with will hopefully never be needed on the home front. But if it ever is, I'm certain that our community will benefit from the work they've done in 108 and in Quesnel and in communities right now where the need is greatest. So on behalf of Council, please pass on our deep thanks to your crews and our wish for Godspeed that they return safely to their families here in Coquitlam. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our first formal item on the agenda this evening concerns the 2017 Ipsos Reid Citizen Satisfaction Survey. I'd like to invite Ms. Catherine Noss to come forward. She's a director with Ipsos Public Affairs Canada in order to make this presentation.
Thank you very much for having me here today. As you mentioned, my name is Catherine Knaus. I'm a director with Ipsos. Ipsos has been conducting the city's citizen survey for a number of years now, and it's always a pleasure to come and present the results. For today's presentation, it's going to be an overview of some of the key findings coming out of the survey, and a much more detailed report has also been provided to staff. I wanted to begin with a brief overview of the objectives and methodology. Broadly speaking, the overall objective was to obtain residents' feedback on municipal services, priority issues, and overall quality of life in Coquitlam. And then within there, we touched on a wide range of topics covering perceptions of both the community and the city, but this is the overarching objective. For the methodology, we kept it consistent with previous years and took a telephone survey approach. This is the best way of getting a random and representative sample. To that end, we conducted 500 interviews with adult Coquitlam residents. The sample for the survey was drawn by postal codes that were provided by the city, and then we included a screening question at the start of the survey as well to confirm that everyone who takes part is indeed a Coquitlam resident. The survey was conducted in May, between May 18th and 29th, and then on the back end we applied a statistical weight to ensure that the sample's overall neighborhood, age, and gender composition is consistent with the most recent census. A sample size of 500 has an overall margin of error plus or minus 4.4 percentage points, 19 times out of 20. That's your overall margin of error. If there are any subsample analysis, so if you're doing any analysis by demographics, age, gender, neighborhood, whatever it might be, you're going to have a larger margin of error simply because you're dealing with a smaller sample size. But for today's presentation, we're looking at the overall results, and this is what the margin of error is. And then lastly, we included tracking and normative comparisons where appropriate. For the tracking, as I mentioned, we've been doing this survey for a number of years, as far back as 2003, and there's great value in being able to compare this year's results to previous years. It not only gives you a sense of where things are at this year, but also helps identify how attitudes and priorities might be changing, any new or emerging issues facing the city, and also help assess the city's progress in addressing any of the key issues. For the normative comparisons, these are based on work that we've done with other BC communities in the past 5 years. So Ipsos as a whole does a lot of citizen surveys similar to this in BC and across Canada as well, often asking very similar questions. So where we can, we've developed this database of norms and then benchmark your results to the normative result for the province. I wanted to begin with perceptions of overall quality of life. This is a good 30,000-foot look at how residents view life in the community today. And as you can see, virtually all residents, 98%, rate the quality of life favorably. And that's split roughly equally between those saying very good at 48% and good at 50%. For the tracking, that's a year-over-year comparisons, that's included at the table in the bottom, and you can see how perceptions of quality of life have been since we started asking this question in 2003. This year's results aren't significantly different from last year. No significant differences either in the overall or the very good. What's noteworthy, though, is if you go back further in time and look at a decade ago, the percentage saying very good has increased quite a bit. In 2007, it was 28%, and that's up to 48% this year. It's noteworthy, particularly when your overall ratings, that's a combined very good score, are so high, there's not room for a lot of upward growth there. So if we were to see a change, it's good to see it in that very good column. speaks to how highly residents feel about quality of life in Coquitlam. The normative result is included in the column to the right. You can see that results in Coquitlam are similar to what we see elsewhere. People generally tend to be satisfied with the quality of life in their community, and Coquitlam is no exception. We also asked residents how they thought quality of life in the community has changed over the past 5 years. Here you can see that half, 50%, say quality of life has stayed the same. What's noteworthy, however, is that residents are more than twice as likely to say that quality of life has improved than it has worsened, and that gives you a strong positive net momentum score of plus 18 percentage points. It points to an overall sense of optimism in the community and things are heading in the right direction. Historically, that's not unusual. If you look at the tracking results along the bottom, there has been that sense of positivity in the community, but not to the extent that we're seeing this year. So it's much more pronounced this year with the net score of plus 18. That was plus 11 in 2016. This year's net score is actually one of the highest that we've ever seen. The last time we saw plus 18 was in 2011, and it's never been higher than that. So it was plus 18 in 2011, dropped a little bit in 2012, and then kind of plateaued, and then we're seeing a boost again this year. We also asked residents what they felt was the most important issue facing their community, and here we asked about most important issue, next most important issue, and what we've included here is the total mentions, so that's the combined of those two. This was an open-ended question, so citizens were not prompted in their responses. They were free to say whatever was on their mind, and then on the back end, we coded them into these broad categories that we've called nets. For those of you who are familiar with past surveys that we've done, it's probably no surprise that transportation comes up on top, with 36% of residents mentioning some kind of transportation-related issue as the most important issue in the community today. So that includes things such as conditions of streets, roads, 11%, traffic congestion was 10%, general transportation mentions were 8%, public transit was 8%, road safety 1%, and parking 1%. This year's results are not significantly different from 2006, and they're also on par with the norm. They're a little bit higher than the BC norm, but for all intensive purposes, that's very similar. Following transportation, the next most important issue this year is what we've called social. That's at 22%. By far, the most important social issue, the one that's mentioned most frequently, is housing, lack of affordable housing, and that garners 17% of mentions. So if you're looking at these when they're not categorized into these nets, housing, lack of affordable housing is actually the most frequently mentioned issue in Coquitlam. It's when we combine them into these nets that those transportation-related issues come out on top. Social issues have increased this year from 2016. It was 17% in 2016. It's up to 22% this year. You can't see it on this slide, but it is included in the detailed report. It's actually the second consecutive year that social mentions have increased. I believe it was 8% in 2015, jumped to 17% in 2016, and then up to 22% this year. Also higher than the BC norm. With the norm, though, it's important to realize that's based in the past 5 years, and I know housing affordability has been always an issue here, but particularly in the past couple of years in Metro Vancouver and the province, it's been more of an issue, so it might take a little bit for the norm to catch up with this, but by and large, we're seeing it more in Coquitlam than we're seeing it elsewhere in the province. Other important issues this year, less so than transportation and social, but still worth the mention, are municipal government services at 11% and growth and development at 10%. Both of those are on par with 2016 and also consistent with the norm. All other issues are mentioned by less than 10% of residents, but there's still a few things here that I'd like to point out. Mentions of taxation and municipal government spending have gone down significantly this year. They were 11% in 2016 and actually the third most important issue overall last year. That's down to 6% this year and sits in the middle of the pack. Mentions of healthcare, however, have gone up. We know from past surveys that transportation is an important issue, so we wanted to dig a little deeper. That can include many different things, and we got a little bit of insight into what that may be in the previous question, but we wanted to directly ask citizens what they felt was the biggest transportation issue facing Coquitlam today. And as you can see, there's two main things that come out. Again, this was an open-ended question, so citizens weren't prompted in their responses. What comes up on top is the quality, the level of public transportation mentioned by a third of residents, and that's followed by traffic or traffic congestion mentioned by 25%. pretty similar to what we saw in 2016, maybe a little bit different in the percentages attached to it, but the same themes come out, those two rows to the top. Last year we also saw quite a few residents mention the Evergreen line or the SkyTrain at 18%. That's down to 3% this year. SkyTrain did open in late 2016, and this survey was done in May, so it's already been in operation for a few months since then, and that's probably why we're seeing less mentions this year. We also asked residents about their satisfaction with city services, both overall and with specific services. You can see that citizens are satisfied with the services the city provides. 95% say they're satisfied overall, 39% say they're very satisfied. That's consistent with 2016. It's also on par with our norm. You can't see it here, but the percentage saying very satisfied is actually quite a bit higher in Coquitlam than the norm as well. Citizens are satisfied with all the specific services we tested as well. I won't go through all of them, but fire services, 98%, public works, 98%, police, 96%, parks, 96%. High satisfaction ratings for a lot of these services. If you go to the bottom, relatively lower for neighborhood planning, 77%, and road maintenance, 74%. Still the majority satisfied, but compared to the other services that were tested, those certainly sit lower. Road maintenance satisfaction has dropped this year. It was 81% in 2016, down to 74% this year. We didn't ask residents why they might be less satisfied, but I know we did have an unusually long and difficult winter, which can be difficult for the roads, and the survey might be picking up on this. In terms of the norm, this year's results are pretty consistent with what we've seen elsewhere. One that does stand out as a highlight in Coquitlam is sports fields. Coquitlam residents tend to be more satisfied than average with that. We asked residents about their perceptions of value for taxes. 86% say they're satisfied. More saying fairly good value than very good value, but still quite positive overall. And that's actually fairly typical. If you look at the norm, that breakdown of very good, fairly good is consistent with what we're seeing elsewhere. And the combined score is actually higher in Coquitlam than what we see elsewhere as well. So Coquitlam residents are more likely to say that they receive good value for their taxes. And this year's results are consistent with what we've seen in the past. As with previous surveys, we did ask citizens if they had to choose, would they prefer the city to increase taxes or cut services? I know it's a choice no one really wants to make, but we wanted to get some insight into the direction that citizens would like the city to go. And as with past surveys, there's a preference for increased taxes, with 51% saying increased taxes, 38% saying cut services. The taxes is 19% saying increase taxes to enhance or expand services, whereas 32% say increase taxes to maintain services at current levels. Service cuts is more of a preference for maintaining the status quo, with 26% saying cut services to maintain current tax level and 12% saying cut services to reduce taxes. This year's results, that preference for tax increase over service cuts is consistent with what we've seen in the past in 2016, no significant difference. But if you look a little closer, the percentage saying increased taxes has dropped slightly, and the percentage saying cut services has increased slightly. So as a whole, the gap separating the two options has narrowed. It's still within the past 5-year average, but certainly less, it's narrower than we've seen last year, which might be an early indication of a lessening tolerance for tax increases. It's difficult to say, but it'd be interesting to see kind of where this nets out the next time the survey is conducted. Having said that, Coquitlam residents' tolerance for taxes is still on par with the norm. And then lastly, we asked citizens about their satisfaction with the city's customer service. We know that half of citizens say they personally contacted or dealt with the city in the past 12 months, and 82% of those residents say they were satisfied with the overall service they received, and half, 49%, say they were very satisfied. Consistent with 2016 and also on par with the norm. Citizens are also satisfied with different elements of customer service. Courteous of staff stands out as a particular highlight, 93% saying they're satisfied, 65% saying they're very satisfied. Staff's knowledge, 85% satisfied. Helpfulness, 84%. Good satisfaction scores across the board, a little bit lower for speed and timeliness of service at 77%, and ability to resolve issue at 75%. Satisfaction with speed and timeliness of service has also dropped this year. It was 85% in 2016, down to 77% this year. Normative comparisons do show that Coquitlam residents are less satisfied than the norm. with the ability of staff to understand needs, the ease of reaching staff, as well as the speed and timeliness of service. So still good in Coquitlam, but not quite as good as we've seen in other communities. So a few last marks in closing. Overall, citizens continue to demonstrate predominantly positive views of the community and city. This is a consistent theme throughout the survey. Citizens say they have a good quality of life, they're satisfied with the services, and they receive good value for taxes. Really, the results should be viewed in a favorable context. Perceptions of the quality of life in Coquitlam remain strong, and citizens are increasingly optimistic about the direction that quality of life is taking. Virtually all residents say Coquitlam offers a good quality of life. The percentage saying quality of life is very good has increased significantly as compared to a decade ago. When we ask residents how the quality of life has changed over the past 5 years, you get much more residents saying it's improved than worsened, so there's some positive momentum. As a whole, transportation-related issues continue to top the public issue agenda, but as I mentioned, social issues, particularly housing costs, are a growing concern for the second consecutive year. Overall satisfaction with city services remains high. This is both overall and with specific services. We did see a drop in satisfaction with road maintenance this year. Perceptions of the city's value for taxes remain high. While citizens continue to prefer tax increases over service cuts, the balance is shifting, although still in line with the past 5-year average. So still prefer tax increases over service cuts, but perhaps a little bit less so than we've seen in previous years. And then lastly, the city continues to provide good customer service. That's overall, and with specific elements, like I mentioned, courteous of staff stands out as a highlight, and satisfaction with the speed and timeliness of service has dropped this year. That wraps up my presentation. Happy to entertain any questions or comments.
Councillor O'Neill. Normally you would, that's all. No. Councillor Towner.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation. I'm just wondering, housing comes up every year as the majority of the social issues. So I'm curious, if housing was a category on its own, would it be number 2 after transportation?
No, transportation would still be on the top if you combine all the transportation mentions. Housing sits at around 17%, I think it was that I said.
So if you took out the other social, the other 5% from social, then housing would be the number 2.
Yes, sorry, that's correct. Yes, sorry, you're right.
So is there any consideration in breaking out housing as a separate category? Because I'm thinking with the strides we're making with our housing affordability strategy and our incremental density and increasing supply of housing, that we'll probably be making improvements here.
We certainly could look at doing that. I mean, traditionally we've combined housing with social. It's how we do our normative comparisons. That's not to say we can't break it out for you guys. We'd be making the normative comparisons a little bit more difficult. And the year-over-year comparisons a little bit more difficult as well. But we can certainly look at breaking out housing, particularly if you're making some strides in that area, to kind of see how that changes over the next few years.
It'd be interesting to see. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zurillo.
Thank you for the summaries. That was awesome. I just had a couple of questions about the methodology. The first question is about census. Was it the most current census that was used for weighting, or was it the past?
It was. For age and gender, it was the most recent census. For neighborhood, we got those stats from the city of Coquitlam, and I believe it might have been the previous census for that.
Okay.
We used the most recent ones that we had available to us.
Okay. I am interested in those neighborhood ones going forward. But that's not for you, that's more for staff. Then my second question is about, obviously, cell phones.
Yes.
This is always the question, is the in-house telephone really representative? So was there any cell phone calls mixed in this one?
This question comes up every year, and unfortunately, for this particular survey, we're only able to do landlines. If we're doing a survey, we always look at incorporating some kind of dual-frame cell phone landline sampling methodology. Without getting too much into the technical aspects of it, it does work better in larger communities. So if we're not that Coquitlam's not a large community, it's just your borders are so close with the neighboring communities, it's very difficult for us to pinpoint Coquitlam residents with the cell phone methodology. We did try it one year, and we ended up getting people in New Weston, Port Coquitlam, and Port Moody, and Burnaby, even Vancouver. Ended up being a very ineffective and cost-prohibitive way of doing the sampling for your survey. So we still stand by, it's still the best way of getting a random and representative sample. We do have quotas in place to make sure we're getting a good mix of ages, genders, and neighborhoods. And then, like I said, we also weight it as well. So it is a representative survey to the best that we can do.
Sure. So I'm not worried about that because we're watching trend, but I am worried about like when are we going to change how we do the methodology, not just us, but even for your norms, because at some point it's going to have to change.
Yeah, and that's a very valid point. Like I said, where we can in other communities, we have incorporated cell phones. Every year we do this survey for you. I do talk to our call center and our field staff about whether that's an option for this survey. At some point we could look at doing another test, but as of right now, it's simply landlines. It's the best that is all we can offer.
Which again, I'd be concerned about changing the methodology even to go to cell phones, unless we were going to change some other things. So that's why I wanted to ask you about the sample size. So I saw some of the sample sizes were quite small for neighborhoods, so we couldn't dive deep into neighborhoods, which is what I would love to do. I'd love us to expand the size of our sample. What is the smallest sample size that Ipsos recommends to do deep diving if we were going to look at it by neighbor?
We would recommend 100, but that's not feasible in some of the neighborhoods. So the minimum I would look at is 50 to 75 per neighborhood.
And the margin of error would be?
It would be higher. I don't.
Over 20?
No, it wouldn't be over 20. Maybe around 13%, 13, 14%.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. No question that trying to figure out other methods than the landline is something we'd all be interested in. We know that the boundaries between communities in the Tri-Cities are not logical or intuitive, and most residents kind of ignore them anyway, but we would have to figure out how to get past that sort of element. I have a question about these pictures. Mm-hmm. The garbage hasn't been collected that way in Coquitlam for a number of years, and the 4 adults in the bottom picture are breaking the law related to helmets. So I wonder if we could, I couldn't find anything wrong with the library photo, but so I'm trying to end on a positive note. There's nothing wrong with the library photo.
We can change the pictures. If there's pictures that you would like to use, staff can send them to me and we can certainly update those. Yeah.
And if the only thing the mayor can find wrong with your report is the stock photos you've used, I thank you very much. This is always informative, it's always helpful, and it's always, it undoubtedly fuels the fire chief as he recognizes that 98% of the residents like him and only 95 like the police chief.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. At 95 like the police. They think they're doing a good job, and since about 7% of the population is known to police, that means at least 2% of those people who are known to police still think they're doing a good job.
On a related note, we're selling tickets to the next executive team meeting for that discussion to take place.
There you go. Boom. Outstanding. There we go.
Next item, item 2, concerns the minutes of the public hearing held on Monday, July 10th. Recommendation to approve.
I'll go move Councillor Zarrillo, second Councillor Towner. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 3 is minutes of the regular council meeting held on Monday, July 10th. Recommendation to approve.
Go move deep voice over there. Councillor Marsden, second Councillor Towner. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 4 is minutes of the Multiculturalism Advisory Committee meeting of Wednesday, June 21st. Recommendation to receive.
Moved by Councillor Asmundson, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 5 is the first report of staff this evening, and it too relates to multiculturalism, and this is a proposed scope and process to update the multiculturalism strategic plan. Staff recommendations: the council authorizes staff to update the multiculturalism strategic plan following the process outlined in the report before you.
It's been moved and seconded by the chair and vice chair of the Multiculturalism Advisory Committee, Councillor Asmundson and Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 6 pertains to development variance permit authorization to increase the maximum building height at 2601 Lougheed Highway. These are on the Riverview lands. Prior to reading the staff recommendation, I would request that the mayor call for speakers.
Thank you. And before I call for speakers, are there any speakers to this item? We hold a little public hearing related specifically to the request for a variance on the height. Sir, name it.
Two other speakers on this matter.
Your address for the record. Your address for the record.
My address for the record?
Any address that
It's in
you...
Vancouver, 1618 Quebec Street for Vancouver.
There you
The
go.
address for the site is at the Riverview.
Oh, I know, I just need, the record has to reflect an address, either office or home for you. Thank you.
So I'll start over again. I'm David Rockham with Elliston, and I'm here to present this great project to the council, and in order to get our variance permit for the height, I present John McSween. He's our lead architect. He'll be talking about the form and function of the building, and then Meredith, she will be talking to the landscape on the site as well. So I'll turn it over to John.
Didn't press far enough. Good evening. As a Coquitlam resident, I am really happy to be here this evening.
I'll take your word for that, but you have to give us your name and address anyway.
John McSween, 812 Sprice Avenue.
Bryce Avenue, wonderful, thank you.
Very happy to be here this evening. And I'm here with a fairly serious responsibility, and that is to represent the project at Riverview Lands for CMHA, the Center for Mental Health and Addictions. I've been working as an architect, designing and building mental health hospitals for almost 30 years. This one is one that's in my own backyard, and I'm really happy and proud to be associated with. Just to give you a little background as to the group that we're trying to serve at Riverview. There are about 130,000 individuals in the province with mental health and addictions issues. CMHA is a source of hope for those with the greatest needs. These are people that are about 10 times more likely to have been diagnosed with schizophrenia or personality disorders, and 6 times as likely to have concurrent drug and or alcohol addictions. They are the most in need, and they are beyond the abilities of our conventional places of help. Our conventional hospitals and clinics are not able to help these folks. The Riverview Development is a unique opportunity to establish a center of care for those most in need. The incorporation of the surrounding environment has the potential to enhance and encourage a path to recovery for these individuals. The program space outside the building can have as much influence and positive effect on the recovery of these folks as the inside of the building. So we have to establish a background of where we've come over the last period with the site. This is a bit of a grainy photograph, but it is a picture of that part of the Riverview lands that is slated for the development for CMHA. And as you can tell from the photograph and from, I'm sure, everyone here who knows, it's covered with a great number of highly prized and protected trees. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the influences of the design that we are proposing And some of the things that influence us, there are basically two components to this development. There's an inpatient component, and then there's a support component. The inpatient component, or the IPU, has a very different building form requirement than the support zone, and it tends to want to be a long, linear building. It's a series of smaller rooms. They are typically accessed off a common corridor. Staff views and safety and patient safety are of the utmost importance. So that lends us to a linear building form. The support block, which is clinical support and administrative support, tends to be larger spaces. They can be clustered around open areas, and they tend to have different levels of security and safety concerns within them, and can have larger components. Sorry, a larger building form. So again, what we're seeing on top of the site here, the red area is the area that's designated for the construction. The white lines or white circles are showing the priority 1 trees. And what we have done is taken our 2 building forms, kept them as low as we possibly can. We have on the left side of the screen is the inpatient unit. On the right side of the screen is the support area. And as you can see, we've skirted the priority 1 trees. We're not without impact to the trees at all, but we do have a significant mitigation program that Meredith will speak to in a few minutes. Any questions? Meredith, would you like?
My name is Meredith Mitchell with M2 Landscape Architecture. I am also lucky to be a member of Coquitlam, 1181 Falcon Drive. So I've also got the good fortune to be involved with this project as well. Landscaping has also been a very important component of this particular project. I will give you a little bit of an overall of the general concept of what we were trying to do, and then a follow through and guidelines. I'm also, actually, my company is also doing the arboricultural work for this project as well, so we were able to combine, which is very nice. It does allow us to have a very close amount of coordination with all the consultants on the team, the architect, and the overall design build firm. So it's very nice to be able to be involved with this. So landscape, this is what we're talking about here on our form. Our background, or our overall overweening idea was in talking about inclusivity, both within the trees, also with the people who are going to be using the facility, and then also the people who are in the general community in this area. This area is an area that people use. They walk through this area. It's a beautiful area. We want to make sure it's inclusive as possible in many different ways. The other item that we have to be very careful about is obviously the existing trees and then the overall environment. And there is a large amount of stakeholders for this particular project, which we've really tried to stay coordinated with as much as possible. There was a lot of guidelines for landscape, including native restoration, that's I'm talking plant material, and then also the overall concept and context of the historic lands of Riverview, which is very much known as being an arboretum. And so we really wanted to enclose all of that in the idea of Riverview as a circulation system and a pattern and a area where it's inclusive of all of these. So also on top of that, what we wanted to try and do is introduce a thought of permaculture, which is essentially a sustainability concept for landscape, which tries to encourage plant material to grow into its environment with a reduced amount of maintenance requirements, which is obviously something that's very important when it comes to a facility such as this. Obviously, the cost that you want to spend the money on is on the building and on the people who are using the facility. You don't necessarily want to spend as much money on the maintenance of the landscape, which looks lovely as much as possible. But we really want to make sure that the funds that we have are available are for the people who are using the facility and for the people who are in the community. So that's one thing that we were trying to do. So the guidelines that we were following were both the historic concept, the natural concept, permaculture, and then also tree retention and the importance of the trees on the site. And so with that, arboriculturally speaking, There was approximately 41 trees on the site. We're retaining 21 of them. All of them are priority 1 trees, plus some priority 2 trees and priority 3 trees. These levels of importance of trees come from the Riverview arborists, who we have been following quite closely with their guidelines. And then the trees, there are 20 trees that are being removed. The only trees that are being removed are the ones that are within the building footprint or the required excavation for the building footprint alone. And on top of that, there was a requirement for replacement of trees. So for this, we have been following the replacement value of 4 to 1, which means that 20 trees are being removed, 80 trees are being placed instead. And then in that, the concept, excuse me, of both the Riverview Arboretum concept with exotic species and large canopy trees to provide shade for permaculture, and also a very interesting view of it, both from all street frontages, so both Orchid Street and on Lougheed side. It's providing a very green face to the buildings, which is going to be really important. On top of that, also the tree material that we're selecting is also partially native, and a lot of the plant material, the shrub material, and the ornamental grasses and things like that are also of a native restoration mix, which ultimately we got guidelines to allow for a restoration of the lands to a pre-context environment as much as possible. And that is actually following through to the idea of permaculture as well. So obviously the plant material that's native to the environment is obviously going to be the ones that is most easily maintained and also will grow into that environment. So we were given guidelines for many different things, including what we are going to be doing for programming of the space and how it was going to be complying with both interior and how it was relating to the exterior and how we wanted the people to use the space. We wanted, thank you, we wanted people to be able to be drawn outside, to bring different spaces, but we also wanted people to be drawn outside to interact with people from the Riverview lands, but also people from the general community as well. We wanted it to be more park-like and arboretum-like. And so this is really what we wanted to do with these areas. So we had a continual pathway structure through the area, and then there was other 2 areas which we had requirements for in our plan, and one was a veggie garden area and a seating and environmental area on one side, and then also a sports and a community area which had basketball courts, sport courts, seating areas, and other areas on the other 2 sides. So really bringing people into this environment, being able to see this, people using this space, bringing people in, talking, being able to walk through these areas. That's the really important part about this whole site. We were really complying with what we were wanting to do with the requirements for the clinical aspect of it, but really it's something overall to make it an attractive space for everyone to use. And that's what we were trying to comply with here. Other items are just following through with what the architecture is doing, and the architect has worked very, very hard in enclosing and encompassing both the retained trees on the site and the new trees that are following through for providing sight lines and guidelines through these areas, and allowing for these areas to be inclusive and close to these building fronts. So overall, that's the concept of what we have for the landscape. If you have any questions in regards to landscape, we'll continue on with the architecture as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. I'll just take a couple of moments to talk to you a little bit about the nature and the imagery and the intent of the form of the building that we are proposing. We're trying very much to keep the building low-key, to become homogeneous with the site, to address the topography. This is a section through the building, and as much as possible we have recessed as much of the building into the slope of the site as we can, and are working to mitigate the overall impact of the height of the building on the lands. But there is a critical mass that we need in order to maintain the spatial relationships to make sure that we can maintain the staff and patient safety inside the programs. These are four sort of quick schematic views of the building from sort of the four compass directions, but you can see that, and the trees that are shown on here, none of these are the new trees. So these are the trees that we are maintaining within the building site, and in addition to these will be the ones that Meredith adds. So, very much trying to find the balance between the needs of the clients and the safety of the clients and staff, and respect for the natural environment and the KFN design guidelines for the Riverview lands. And in doing so, we are proposing a building that is very transparent, fairly low scale and human proportions. It will have, we're talking with the KFN about them actually having some pallets on the building to provide some art pieces as part of the overall design. Built and view of the building on the top from within Riverview lands, on the bottom from outside the Riverview lands. The main entrance, again, we're trying to keep it low-key, trying to keep it fairly community-based, and as far away from the sort of big institutional imagery that as we can possibly get. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers to this item? Any other speakers to this item? Last time. Any final comments? Nope. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks. I just had a couple questions about the landscaping. I'm sorry, I should have asked when you were up originally. I apologize. Was there any consideration on transplanting some of the existing trees that had to be removed?
Yes, we did actually, through the chair, we did actually look at transplanting of any of the trees that were to be impacted on the site, and the size of the trees precluded the retention of them. In general terms, when I try and transplant trees, you need a minimum of a 2-year cycle to be able to root prune for them to be to give them an opportunity to grow new feeder roots and such, and to be able to healthily have a higher viability for transplantation. And most of the trees of this size were ones that were not, we didn't have the time frame and viability for them to be relocated.
These are things that have to happen in the 2 years prior to being relocated?
In general rules, when it comes to trees, if you think of the root system as being a plate, to successfully transplant a tree, you really need to prune the roots in the size of the root ball that it's going to be transplanted in, if you're getting those ones that have the diggers that come down and do them. And you need to actually prune them enough so they have enough feeder roots that are close to the root ball, so you don't cut all of them off when you're going to transplant a tree. Now, on a tree, you can transplant and successfully transplant any trees of any size if you want to. It's a matter of time frame and honestly of money and of time and maintenance costs to be able to take care of them until they actually start growing their roots again. And in this particular case, the trees were of a size, with the exception of the hawthorns, which are the 5 trees that are in the front on the closer to the orchid side. They weren't of the health that we thought that would have a long-term viability to grow, and their feeder roots in time to actually be able to successfully transplant them. We didn't think that they would survive. I did not think they would survive. We did look at that, though.
Great. Is that something that realistically could be done with more advanced notice on other parts of the site? There's a lot of people in the community that bought into this vision of renewing Riverview based on the fact that things were going to be built on existing disturbed footprints and that sort of thing. And the first 2 buildings that have been proposed, over 60 trees have had to come down. So is that something that, given enough time and preparation, we could look at for other parts of the site?
Through the chair. It's a potential, I think that it would increase the viability the more time that you give them. It's very dependent on the overall health of the tree, the species of the tree, and whether there are ones that react well to this type of moving or root pruning, and then time frame, and then also economics. It does cost a fair amount. An example would be if you're relocating 20-foot tall Douglas fir, it would cost, thousands of dollars to relocate it, and then thousands of dollars to maintain it for the time frame that we think that it would be viable. And then in this case, frequently, in my opinion, usually you need to have a minimum of 2 to 3 growing seasons to prune the trees. Usually it's between 25 and 30% of the entire circle of the tree needs to be pruned to allow that quadrant to grow new roots, that quadrant to grow new roots, and then when you finally cut it, that last one, it's either the last third or last quarter that you get the whole thing and then move it over. So the longer time frame would be best, and then also maintaining the tree prior to, because what you do need to do is make sure that the tree is in its best health as possible prior to it being moved, prior to its having its roots pruned and then moved. So it has a lot of variability in it, and it is really dependent. Obviously, smaller trees, younger trees transplant a lot better than ones that are very old. And a lot of the trees that are in these areas, unfortunately, are ones that have been there a long time, and generationally speaking, it is a loss. But also generationally speaking, we're actually planting a significant amount more trees to provide a new set of canopy that's going to be growing further. And in this case, it actually gives us a little bit more of an opportunity, since obviously we're planting 80 trees in replacement of the 20. Each one of those species can be different to increase the viability.
And approximately the size of the replacement trees?
They will vary in size. Generally, they'll be anywhere between, for a deciduous tree, 5 centimeter caliper, 6 centimeter caliper, 7. Those are usually anywhere between 10 to 15 feet in height. And then the conifers can be varied between 2.5 to 4 meters in height, depending on what species they are. And also the rate of growth on how much they put on once they're installed will vary depending on species.
Okay, thank you. Last time we had the other building for review, the arborist report talked about a number of trees that were diseased and in really rough shape. And I'd asked at the time if our staff could look into, is this common? Is this going to be an issue with more and more of the trees that we're going to see? And if we could look into why so many of these trees were diseased. I'm not sure if that's happened yet, but if that was something that council was interested in, I would appreciate us providing some direction in terms of having a closer look and figuring out why so many trees were diseased and in such poor condition.
Yeah, we're going to have a bit of trouble dealing with in the context of a height variance for the building. But there are some relatednesses, try that one, between, obviously, relationships between the size of the footprint and the number of trees that come down. And that's why I've allowed the latitude on the question of landscaping. And quite frankly, some latitude on some other elements of design, mostly because we're very curious. We are a passionate community, very passionate about mental health service delivery and about the important role that Riverview has played for generations. And as someone who's had a family who spent time in institutional facilities for mental illness, the elements of the design are certainly something that many people in our community value and are glad to hear the amount of passion coming out of the design team here. So I thank you very much for that. And I'm going to ask one last time, are there any more speakers to the item of the development variance permit? Seeing none, I'll declare that closed. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Staff recommendations that Council approve the signing and sealing of the DVP on 2601 Lougheed Highway, and the Mayor and City Clerk be authorized to execute it.
Councillor Reid. Moved by Councillor Marsden, seconded by Councillor Towner. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. As everyone around here knows, I'm totally against the development plan for Riverview. I'm disappointed that this particular building has taken up more green space than it was supposed to, and I'm incredibly disappointed in the removal of some of our trees because they've been there for a lot longer than any of us. However, this is for a development variance permit for height, and if we don't approve it, the province can do it anyhow, so I will have to support approving it, but I wanted to let you know.
Yeah, I'm similarly disposed to is the height variance permit, and you had us before you made your presentation, I think, because we don't want these buildings to be sprawled out. We want as much of the green space to be retained as possible. I'm kind of a little bit frustrated that it takes perhaps 2 years to root prune a tree. The decision to build this building was made about 2 years ago. If there are any more buildings coming, could the province please consider preparing the trees, or either that or locating them in the vast portions of the site that don't have any trees, or locating them, or starting to prepare the trees for the inevitable possibility that they will, for the possibility that they would benefit from removal and transplanting on a different spot on this enormously precious site. That said, the question is a DVP. All in favor? Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much for coming. And mostly we gave you latitude because you're Coquitlam residents.
Next item, item 7, is our second development variance permit authorization of the evening. And this one is to reduce the front lot line setback provisions for a proposed subdivision at 1419 Pipeline Road. Staff recommendations, council approve the signing and sealing of this DVP for 1419 Pipeline Road, and that the mayor and city clerk be authorized to execute it.
Moved by Councillor Rasmussen, seconded by Councillor Reid. Councillor Zerillo?
Yeah, through the chair, I have some questions to staff.
Sorry, my apologies. Yep. As a DVP, we're going to do the same thing. I'll open the floor to questions from the audience on tonight's development variance permit. Thank you very much for catching that. Are there any speakers to this item? Any speakers to this item? The front lot line setbacks at 1419 Pipeline, third and last time. Any speakers to this item? I'll declare that closed. Councillor Zerillo.
Okay, thank you.
Are you just going to speak for the second time now?
Yes, I speak multiple times. I just wanted to get the background from staff around the current setbacks, the reasoning behind the current setbacks for our RS3 zone, is it? Why do we choose the setbacks we choose?
So the rationale, are they arbitrary or is there some specific rationale? Mr. Fuji.
Through the chair to Councillor Zerillo, I will take a shot at this question.
Let's ask the newest guy. Why did we do this?
The 25-foot front yard setback, or the 7.6 meters, it's pretty typical of most single-family zones across Metro, and I suspect in most other municipalities across the country. I recall many years ago I engaged in a conversation with a fellow planner, and we sort of collectively thought, it does facilitate, the typical length to accommodate a car in a driveway. And so I think some of those factors have driven, not only within Coquitlam, but throughout Metro Vancouver, and I suspect throughout the province and the country on the front yard setbacks.
So you think it's related to accommodating a car?
That through the chair to councillors with that is one factor in the suburban contact with our front loaded lots. That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So the reason I'm asking is because I want to understand if we need to revisit our setbacks, because it's not the first time that I've seen different property owners that are trying to squeeze out as many lots as possible, and I just want to make sure that in this time where we're trying to address housing affordability and we're trying to get more houses built potentially on smaller lots, that this 25-foot setback, what did you say, 7 point something meters, still makes sense. So does planning and development believe that across the board generally that this 25-foot setback is still reasonable and
Relevant.
Relevant? Thank you, Mayor Stewart.
Through the chair to Councillor Cirillo, the zoning bylaw has that 25 or 7.5 meter setback requirement. But one of the reasons in this particular case the applicant is requesting the setback variance is that there is a considerable amount of road dedication taken from the site in excess of 10 feet, which really reduce the depth of the property. So, and in order for the applicant to realize or get the appropriate building envelope to build a house, it's I guess the alternative, they could have asked for a reduction in the building envelope, but it would have resulted in a relatively small home or a home with a small footprint. So these various factors have led to the variance request. And also it was pointed out to council a number of years ago when the actual rezoning proposal was brought forward back in 2016. Staff did note in the rezoning report that there would likely to be a subsequent request for a variance just because of the nature of the road dedications and those other factors.
Okay, so yes, in the opinion of the staff, the current setback is still relevant. And I guess I wanted to ask, because I can't see these small numbers anymore, unfortunately. What are these two lot sizes, lot 1 and lot 2, that are coming up for the variance? What are the actual square footage of the lots? $25.7 by 15, yeah.
Through the chair to Councillor Cirillo, in metric, proposed lot, both lots are approximately 576 square meters, which translates into approximately 6,000 square feet.
So, are these ones to a 42% coverage or 45% lot coverage? Is that what these lots have to be? The house footprint can only be 45% of the lot coverage. Is that true for these ones?
Let me quickly check the zoning bylaw.
That one likely wouldn't be relevant in this case, largely because such a high percentage of each of the lots is in setback, rather than. So normally that applies when the lots have one large dimension and it's the length, because the setbacks then become less relevant.
Here they show them. Yeah. They show them here.
Mr. Fuji.
Through the chair to Councillor Cirillo, the maximum allowable lot coverage in RS3 is 45%.
45, yeah.
Yes.
All right. Okay. I guess my concern here is that, we're already getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's potentially 7 lots here anyway, and I just, I don't always feel good about variances. So anyway, thank you for indulging on whether or not we feel that 25-foot setback is still relevant. Thank you.
If I could, one of the intents of variance, or rather the intents of a setback, is to make it so that everybody is the same along the street. And so one of the big objections against an individual variance along a long street is that one house will then stick out 10 feet toward the street more than the remaining houses. So we typically, where they're more relevant is where there's a row of houses along a street, and that the intent of uniformity is lost because you allow a variance. I wouldn't find the other risks in other respects, because there are other zones. For example, if this were zoned, there are other zones where a smaller setback is appropriate, and if they could have applied for that zone on these lots and left the lots the same size, but with a different zone and different setbacks. Of course, the public is oblivious to what the zoning map says. They just know that the setback that is appropriate for the lot is the one that, I guess, fits the neighborhood. It wouldn't fit the neighborhood if it were a different setback from everybody else, but there's no one else. Just my perspective. Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, the question that came to my mind when I was reading this, perhaps it's more of a theoretical one. The setback variance is needed or requested because we have the minimum building envelope requirement. That could a developer, if he wanted to, request a variance on the minimum building envelope requirement in order to achieve the non-varied setback? Is that something that staff would entertain, or is that something that no developer in his right mind would ever want to do? I don't know. Like, does that ever happen?
Through the chair to Councillor O'Neill, I'm, at least in my own personal experience, I've never had a situation where someone's asked to vary a minimum building envelope request. I don't know if Mr. MacIntyre has experienced that in his career here, but
so why do we have a minimum building? Like, why do we force them to build to a certain size? Why can't, if they want to build a little smaller, why can't they? There's another long-term question that maybe
Mr. MacIntyre.
Everybody here.
That's the beauty of zoning. You can never stop questioning it. First, to answer the question, not in my experience with Coquitlam has there been a variance to the minimum building area. Technically, it could be done because a development variance permit, council will recall, you can vary anything but use and density, and I think the site area is outside that. Sort of a little bit in defense of that, it's a useful yardstick or tool for the subdivision approving officer, because sometimes you get some lots proposed that are pretty strange. And the concern there is if you create a lot and then someone goes to build on it and it proves to be very, very difficult, or it's just not a usable building, having that minimum footprint area is a good metric to make sure that you're creating lots that make sense. That said, recently there's been discussion about going to tiny houses. I think our Housing Choices program, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later this evening, I think there's an ability to look at some of those long-held standards. And so I would suggest in the appropriate zones, in the appropriate areas, ideas around reduced front setbacks, maybe slightly smaller building footprint minimums, might be entirely appropriate. I would suggest in this suburban location, given the neighborhood around and the difficulties of the lots, the RS3 zoning is what's allowed for under the official community plan, and these are the requirements under that zone.
Thank you.
And I hate to do this again, but I explained it really badly the last time, that related on the site coverage, and for that matter on the minimum building envelope. It becomes almost impossible to meet the maximum site coverage on a square lot, or on a lot that's not very deep in relation to its width, because the side yard setbacks are so small, and the front and backyard setbacks become 50% of the site already, and therefore you can't exceed 45 because you're not allowed to build outside the setbacks. This is, of course, a square lot, and it becomes constrained if we allowed someone to build I would have voted against the variance to the minimum building area, because you'd end up with a mobile home on the lot, essentially a double height site-built mobile home would be about all you'd be able to build on the site without the variance. So I think that by itself would frustrate it. Yep, absolutely. No. In some cases, it would probably be worth at least having a conversation about it. So the question is the DVP. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Councillor Marsden.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Exercising an overabundance of caution, I'm awaiting a legal opinion on a project that my company has recently engaged in. As a result, I'm going to recuse myself from this next item.
He said an overabundance of caution, and he's not recusing himself for a conflict of interest, but for the possibility of a future conflict or a future perception of conflict. Councillor Asmussen.
No, I'm just waiting for the items to come.
I might not call you first because you jumped the gun.
Oh, thank you.
Mr. Clerk.
Item 8 pertains to proposed zoning amendment bylaw number 4785, and this is for the properties at 804 and 810 MacIntosh Street and 811 Kelvin Street. Staff recommendations that council give first reading to City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4785. The bylaw number 4785 be referred to public hearing. And 3, that staff be instructed to complete the following items prior to council's consideration of fourth reading, should council grant second and third readings to the bylaw. And these are submission of a subdivision plan to the satisfaction of the approving officer, submission of a finalized tree survey and statement regarding tree preservation to the satisfaction of urban forestry, ensure that all development service requirements and issues are addressed to the satisfaction of the Director of Development Services, and D, demolition of the existing structures located at 810 MacIntosh Street and 811 Kelvin Street to the satisfaction of the Planning and Development Department.
Second.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, second by Councillor Asmussen. Councillor Asmussen.
Thank you. I'll move this on to public hearing. We have heard a bit from time, some petitions in this area in regards to development in this area. So I do think we'll probably get some people coming out and making some comments on this. I do think, though, some of the suggestions that the staff made to the developer, I would hope that he'd take them into more consideration, and especially in the transitioning of some of the development here. I think it would help. It'll be interesting to see the comments here. I know some people are upset about density. We talk about affordable housing and the need to increase density. And I got for me, a couple different reactions. There's been people that want the larger houses. There's also been people talking about the need for more affordable housing and more affordable type housing there. So there seems to be in the neighborhood some conflict on that issue. But it'll be interesting to see on that issue. But I'll move this to public hearing. I think we'll have a good turnout for it. But I do think that some of the staff recommendations to the proponent would be wise to take up prior to the public hearing. So that's just my advice. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I have a few questions for staff on this one. So on page 7, you mention increasing lot widths would bring the proposed subdivision into stronger alignment with the policy of the Southwestern plan. But would it bring it significantly into policy in this area? I mean, I realize all these lots along MacIntosh are, larger than what we are. You have a map here, I think, showing some of them are 750 and the ones adjacent are 750 and 850 square meters, and these will be about 555, I believe. Is that correct? About a third smaller?
Through the chair to Councillor Reid, the existing sort of lots directly to the north of the subject site are in the range of a lot width of 60 feet.
Yeah.
And by the staff's suggestion was to take the wider lots being proposed in this proposed subdivision, which are almost 50 feet, move them so they're adjoining the current lots, whereas right now the proposal is the layout shows the proposed narrowest lots in terms of width, sort of abutting the existing wider lots in the neighborhood.
So it's just not going to be as that attractive or attractive.
And
the lots are going to have houses of what kind of square footage? I'm looking at 5,000 plus. Those are big houses for those lots.
Mr. Fuji.
He's looking it up.
Through the chair to Councillor Reid, while staff have yet to receive any building permit drawings or house plans for the site, I guess in theory, given the zoning and the lot sizes, it could result in some fairly large houses, probably even approaching in excess of 7,000, 7,500 square feet. In theory.
Those are massive houses. Pardon?
Sorry, the question from another council member was, that is, if the rezoning was approved, we'd still have, that is, your last number, the 7,000, was including if the rezoning was approved.
That's correct, through the chair. Yeah, if the rezoning were approved under the zoning, that sort of house size could be built. Let me see offhand what the size could be built under existing zoning.
So what I'm concerned about...
Just a second.
I'm sorry, I thought I had...
I've got him yelling at me. He said, just a minute, please, and you're asking him a question. So I just wanted to give him a chance to get the answer to the question, which is, what would the existing zoning... There you go. So, Mr. Fuji. Sorry.
Again, through the chair to Councillor Reid and through your worship, even under the existing RS1 zoning, the relatively large, probably even larger than what could be built under RS3 could again, in theory, be built. The more recent homes, though, constructed in the neighborhood haven't approached that house size. They're more along the lines of... Yeah, the recently constructed homes in the neighborhood are more along the lines of 5,000 square feet, the newer ones.
Okay, and in here, you've got to register, one of the suggestions was to register a restrictive covenant that would limit the maximum house size to 5,500, and that's not been approved by the proponent.
Through the chair to Councillor Reid, the proponent we've had conversations with him, but to date, it's not something he's agreed to do to date.
And the big parcel that's staying on Como Lake Road, it's going to retain the old house that's already there, correct?
That's through the chair, Councillor Reid, that's correct.
It's going to be held for development, or?
Through the chair to Councillor Reid, at this point in time, there's no proposal to move forward with any sort of development other than the existing. However, I guess the owner of the site has approached staff in the past about the possibility of doing a bit more, higher density, fee simple row house, townhouse type of development, but it's just been on a inquiry type of level.
Yeah, I think it's a little premature. I'm disappointed about the lot width, so when we give out the documentation for the public hearing, which I will send this to public hearing because I gather there's a lot of people that are concerned about it. I'd feel better if we had something that would work with the neighborhood. I realize they're going to be smaller lots, but then make the houses just a bit smaller to fit in. And at 5,000 square feet, they're not going to be affordable housing anyhow, so you can get the affordable housing thing off the table. That's not going to be affordable housing. So I have concern when we're trying to infill in a city. It's important that we help the developer as much as we can, but it's also important that we help the neighborhood and try and move in a smooth and neighborly way so that it doesn't take a drastic change. And I have difficulties with this, but I will move it to public hearing and let the public have their say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Towner.
Oh, thank you. I have two quick questions. On page 4, it says that the house was found to have historical and contextual significance. And I'm just wondering, are we going to get any more information about that? or just this one little paragraph about the house that's staying?
Through the chair to Councillor Towner, I could follow up with the applicant in terms of what additional information that he has, but at this point in time, we've been advised that it does have some historical and contextual significance, and at this point in time, the plan is to retain the existing home in its current location.
Okay, thank you. And I hope I didn't miss you already answering this. I was chatting with Councillor Asmussen here for a second, but I've had conversations with people on that street who think that the neighborhood, as Councillor Reed said, has already undergone drastic change. There's some very, 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 very large homes on MacIntosh, and there's, from what I've been hearing, lots of concern about that. So my question is, if we left these lots RS1 and people got to rebuild, what's the potential size that the houses could be?
Through the chair to Councillor Towner, the current lots are quite large, and again, on theory, you could, an owner can construct something probably approaching 9,000 square feet, in theory, given zoning requirements.
Thank you.
Councillor Zerillo?
Yeah, my question through the chair, and maybe it's for the clerk, is just to really understand what, if this goes through to first reading, it's a unanimous decision for it to go to first reading, what am I actually saying? Because I want to be sure that just because I'm saying yes to first reading, I'm not saying yes all the way through. So can I just have a summary of what it means for a councillor to approve first reading? What are we actually saying about the project? Are we saying that we're approving the project? Or are we saying that we want to hear from the people? What does it actually mean to move something to first reading?
Individual members of council who vote to grant first reading are not approving the project. They are simply providing the first reading to the bylaws, which is provincial legislation says prior to third reading of a bylaw, a public hearing must be held. And what this does is allow the proposed bylaw to move forward to public hearing and allow public notification to the neighbors based upon the proposals that are set out in the report of the general manager.
So allow public notification, but is it a time, does it also mean that things can change in the bylaw based on the input from the public after the public hearing?
The bylaw speaks to land use.
Okay.
And as we go forward into public reading, the land use will not change. As planning staff have noted, there may be further discussion with staff about the building or the proposed building, but public hearings are about land use.
Okay. But is there an opportunity for this council to accept, based on what happens at the public hearing, to make adjustments to land use? Like they can accept or not accept the land use? Is that correct? If there's a change?
That is correct.
Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Yep, and I have a feeling I know where that question is going. One of the realities is that we all, generally speaking, we give first reading to something. If we have some need of information, for example, if there's some specific information that we would like in order to help us make the decision after the public hearing when it's put to us for second and third reading, it's often the case that we'd ask for that information at the first reading stage. And it's so that we don't end up at the end of the public hearing having to vote against something because we don't have enough information that we could have asked for earlier in the process. So a lot of people will vote for first reading, perhaps even ask for some information to be provided in the second reading or the public hearing brief or in time for public hearing, so that when second and third reading comes along, they'll have the information that they needed to make the decision. So.
Yeah,
and then certainly can vote against it. First reading is not an affirmation of the project. It's only an affirmation of the project with the information in front of you is enough to have a public hearing and to make the decision. You have enough information to make the decision following the public hearing.
That's correct, and it is It's helpful to make those requests early, simply to allow staff the appropriate amount of time, but also to allow those who have an interest in the project more broadly to hear the same results or the same information. Council, in addition, following a public hearing, has the ability to ask staff to do further, provide further information on a specific basis. But yes, the process now is to allow public input and other inputs in order to help council arrive at the appropriate decision.
Okay. Go ahead. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. So when I look at this development, and the proponent only wants to deal with the north half, the back half of it, what are the options he has to go from what it is now, RS1, right, to RS3? And what other options are there for him? I'm not counting housing choices and that which would not be acceptable, but this is the only other choice, right? Or could there can't be duplexes built there, correct? No? Okay. Just checking to see if we've got all the right zoning. So this is only it. He can go from RS1 to RS3. And that's it. Now, RS3 lots, instead of having 6 lots, he could have 4 lots, right? And would they be RS1s or RS3s then? Still RS3s, I think.
Through the chair to Councillor Reid, there is a provision within the, as noted in the report, within the RS1 zone, which allows, under some certain circumstances, to go down to the 555 square meters, which is being proposed, but it would only be if the applicant were to try to utilize that provision within the zoning bylaw. There could be 4 lots, but not the 6 he's proposing under the current application.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Reid. I have only one comment. I will support it going forward to public hearing, and let's hear from the neighbors and other residents of Coquitlam on it. I'm just going to have. I noticed only one blemish in the report on page 4 at the top. Alana Sisblatt is a great heritage consultant that works for ANCE Building Services, ANCE, not Acne. Mr. Ants, who's the principal of the company, would find that to be a blemish, yes.
While we cannot adjust the report at this time, we will so note should questions arise in the intervening period of time.
Thank you. Oh, dear. Sorry to pick at that. The question is first reading. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. We'll go to a public hearing. That will be in September, will it?
It will be in September, and I will just go collect Councillor Marston.
Thank you.
Next item, item 9, concerns a proposed Northwest Burke Vision and Phase 3 public consultation summary. Staff recommendations that Council approve the proposed Northwest Burke Vision MBV document as attached to the report before you.
Moved by Councillor Asmundson, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. Councillor Asmundson.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to see this is here. We're moving forward on this proposal. I'd like to point out that some of the communication that we've had, this is a 30-year plan. We've had some people in the recommendations coming forward, just from my position on that. There's phasing in this plan, and we have certain areas phased 1 through 4. I don't want to, some of the comments are want to combine phasing or do anything. I want to realize that this is a 30-year plan. The city's vision, focus, I think, right now is on the Parting Creek. We just passed the Parting Creek Village Master Plan. I just want, yep.
I've been advised that staff have a presentation, if we like.
Okay. Sure. Yep.
Okay, there's been a request to see your presentation. It better be good.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was just thinking that. I didn't mean to say it.
Thanks, Your Worship. No pressure. Very briefly.
Apparently we have some cupcakes left, if it is good. Even if it's not good.
Your Worship, we're back tonight. This is the conclusion of the Phase 3 of the Northwest Burke Vision process. We've been at it for a little while. This is an area I would note, particularly given some of the attention extra attention it's received recently. On Burke Mountain, though a small portion is on the west side of the Coquitlam River. It was included within the study area. The lands east of the Coquitlam River are within the Northeast Coquitlam Area Plan, but this was the area that was sort of left, it's like sort of residual lands outside the 4 neighborhoods that were initially planned for the Northeast. So it's an opportunity to look at those lands through this vision process. So with that, I'll turn over to Andrew, and Aubrey are going to do a presentation for you.
I'm going to go through a brief presentation along with Aubrey Jensen, who was the project manager for the Northwest Burke Vision. For several decades, Burke Mountain has been identified as a growth area for Coquitlam, with about a quarter of the city's future growth anticipated to be accommodated on Burke Mountain. To date, 4 neighborhood plans have been created to guide this growth, including both the Upper and Lower Hyde Creek, Smiling Creek, and Parting Creek neighborhood plans. Building on these existing plans, the Northwest Burke Vision provides a long-term game plan for future land use planning, infrastructure provision, and urban growth for the last remaining greenfield area in Coquitlam. The vision area includes about 400 hectares of mostly forested lands, bordered by Pinecombe Burke Provincial Park to the north and the existing Burke Mountain neighborhoods to the south. The area includes many diverse landscapes, including forested areas, steep hillsides, and watercourses. The vision before you provides a high-level land use and servicing concept, as well as phasing criteria that can lay the foundation for future neighborhood planning and infrastructure development in this area. Phase 1 included the development of high-level understanding of the area's topographical, geotechnical, and environmental constraints, and what some of the opportunities for development were. Using the results of Phase 1, staff initiated Phase 2, which identified potential land use, related amenity needs, access, and utility servicing ideas and options. And then building on both Phase 1 and Phase 2, the Phase 3 report, along with the public feedback received, developed the final vision for family-friendly neighborhoods, natural areas, amenities, and parks within a connected transportation network that will be implemented through 4 future detailed neighborhood plans. The draft MBV has also been prepared following a robust public consultation program that sought feedback from area residents and stakeholders. In Phase 3 specifically, this included meeting with property owners, a project advisor group made up of stakeholders and technical experts, 2 community information sessions, and a number of other one-on-one meetings, as well as referrals to external agencies. I'm now going to hand it over to Aubrey Jensen, who's going to take you through some of the technical details of the plan and the results of the latest round of public consultation.
Thank you, Andrew. Your Worship, Council. The public feedback, as noted in Attachment 2 to the report, focused on 3 major themes, and this included the road network, the land use overlay, and phasing and timing. And we've also received feedback from Port Coquitlam, and there'll be more on that later in the presentation. So similar to phase 2, the public feedback focused primarily on the road network with specific focus on Oxford Street, the Hazel Coy area, and Coast Meridian Road. Feedback received for Oxford Street noted opposition to its future extension and concerns over safety. Oxford Street is identified in the city's official community plan and strategic transportation plan and provides a second entry point into the Hazel Coy area. And it also allows for 2 ways in and out of the area and a looping route for transit service and emergency response. Residents of Park Ridge Estates have presented their concerns at the June 12th Council and Committee meeting, and in response, staff have undertaken measures to improve signage in the area by removing vegetation and installing some new signs. In discussion with Hazel Coy residents, a few noted that the proposed location of the collector road was in close proximity to their homes, and staff noted that the road network is conceptual at this time and that the specific alignment will be determined through future neighborhood planning and road design, and these residents will be consulted through that process. The Coast Meridian extension will cross Hyde Creek to the north and provide access into the Hazel Coy area. And a group of developers have expressed interest in jointly contributing financially to this crossing. Their letter is included as attachment 8 in the report. And as this is a collector road, developers are responsible for the road construction costs where it's fronting their property. And staff are recommending that a cost-sharing model would be explored as part of neighborhood planning, and this would also allow that and ensure that all affected property owners are consulted at that time. Regarding the Riverwalk Bridge, staff have met with Burke Mountain Holdings, and they have also submitted 3 letters. 2 of those letters are included in the council report, and a 3rd letter has been received by council directly. In their letter, they note that the Riverwalk Bridge will not require approvals from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans as per the Fisheries Act, and feel that the bridge should not be considered when determining phasing and timing for this area. Staff note, however, that the Vision's phasing plan considers the entire MDV area and does not focus specifically on the bridge crossing and its approvals, but rather focuses on a broad set of criteria which also consider the existing development agreement for this area. Other feedback noted the potential for increased traffic and more demand for parking at entry points into Pinecombe Burke Provincial Park. To address this, the Vision notes that parking studies are to be completed in collaboration with BC Ministry of Environment through future neighborhood planning. Feedback on the land use overlay noted the impact of urban development on wildlife and the increased potential for human-wildlife conflict. As was done in the Partington Creek neighborhood plan, measures will be taken through future neighborhood planning to emphasize the city's bear smart practices to deter wildlife from entering into residential areas and to encourage the safe movement of wildlife through the design of the local road network. Feedback also noted the desire for more diverse forms of housing and alternate options for home ownership. If adopted, the Vision allows for a diverse range of housing, and the city's housing affordability strategy will provide direction for exploring alternative forms of home ownership. Lastly, public feedback noted the need for more neighborhood services and amenities such as commercial and transit services, access to parks, schools, and trails. The proposed vision identifies 2 community nodes to provide local serving commercial services, and the area's population growth will support the Partington Creek Neighborhood Center, which will provide commercial, recreational, and civic amenities serving all Burke Mountain residents. A key element of the vision is the phasing plan, which identifies 4 potential neighborhood planning phases. Letters have been received from Westbuild and Burke Mountain Holdings regarding phasing and timing, and those are attached to the council report. Both of these developers are seeking to advance the timing of their respective areas. Also, Hazel Coy residents have noted their agreement with in the area being identified as the first phase for neighborhood planning, and have also noted they would like to see it identified in the city's 2018 annual business plan. Following these requests to restructure the phasing orders, staff note that the order is based on the phasing criteria as shown on the screen. These criteria provide direction for planned growth within the vision area and are based on a rationale that supports the cost-effective extension of utilities, completion of the road network, and supporting neighborhood centers through the development of complete communities. City of Port Coquitlam feedback is provided through a report and letter from Port Coquitlam, which are included in the council report. This feedback identifies a number of issues, some of which are shown on the screen. And as noted in our council report, the direction in the MBV aligns with the regional growth strategy and our regional context statement. And 2 approaches are identified for addressing the items in the Port Coquitlam letter, which include establishing an intermunicipal senior staff working group made up of key planning, engineering, parks and recreation staff from both municipalities. And the second option is to add these items to the agenda for the upcoming Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam joint council meeting scheduled for October. To ensure the cost-effective extension of utilities, a financial analysis was undertaken as part of Phase 3. And this analysis provides cost estimates for the utilities required to service the area over the long term. This work is also further supported by a technical memo outlining development cost charge eligible utility services identified in the current DCC program, as well as those utility services that would need to be added prior to the development proceeding in this area. As noted in the council report, these costs will be implemented and refined through servicing assessments during neighborhood planning. In summary, the vision provides clear direction for planning on Burke Mountain, which will guide planning and development over the next 30 years. The vision proposes a high-level land use policy framework, which encourages family-friendly neighborhoods with a mix of housing and sensitive site design, and allows for the subsequent preparation of focused and streamlined neighborhood plans. The vision provides a transition between planned growth at the regional level and the preparation of future neighborhood plans. And through a flexible approach, the vision defines a future land use pattern in generalized and conceptual terms that can respond to changing market conditions and provides opportunities for local commercial and civic amenities. If approved, the vision identifies the phasing and timing for 4 potential planning areas, along with specific planning considerations for each area. And through future neighborhood planning, staff will continue working with stakeholders and neighboring municipalities. The timing of these future plans will be determined through the city's annual business plan. In conclusion, staff are recommending that council approve the proposed Northwest Burke vision. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff related to the report? Or we can do that straight through the current speakers list. They'll be seated over there. Can we put the last slide back? That one there? Okay. Councillor Asmundson, please continue.
Thank you once again. I think staff and those involved have done a great job on this visioning document. I think it speaks to a lot of the concerns and a lot of the care that's going to need to be taken as we move forward in this area. As I was mentioning before, I support the staff's rationale and for phasing of this project through the areas. I believe that moving into the Hazel Quarry area as our first neighborhood plan, which would probably take about 2 years generally for a neighborhood plan from planning stages through the process to council and to be completed about 2 years. So, but this is a 30-year plan where I don't see the issue about us advancing works for the city comes down to just not the hard infrastructure, but all the amenities that must go within developments or that are not covered under DCCs or any other type of amenities that have to be funded through other city resources. And once again, I think that we just passed, as I said before, the Pardon Creek Village Master Plan, and I want to make the focus on that village center to make sure that Pardon Creek gets developed around that area. So for those areas, so some of the comments here from some areas wanting to combine or move up their development, I think staff have done a very good job on the rationale of it. I think the letter from Port Coquitlam staff is a good letter. We will work with them in a collaborative way on these issues here. The one comment I'll make on the mayor's letter to us is just to point out that the Coast Marine Overpass, which was built by Port Coquitlam in their decision, he points out $132 million, but TransLink also itself contributed $60 million towards the Coast Marine Overpass, where the regional taxpayers helped contribute $60 million towards that overpass. But I think this is a good plan. I think the consultation has gone well, and I will be supporting the recommendation. Thank you.
you, Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I'm going to go backwards, naturally, to Councillor Rasmussen. I want to talk about the letter from our good neighbours, Port Coquitlam, whom we have worked with for many years, and for the 25 or 27 years I've been around, we've done lots of stuff together. So I was a little concerned when I heard that all the traffic is coming from Burke Mountain, but honestly it isn't. The traffic that we get through in front of our big shopping center here, Lougheed, Barnett Highway, all of that, comes from Maple Ridge, who's been one of the fastest growing communities in the Lower Mainland, Pitt Meadows, who's been fast growing, Poco, who has grown amazingly fast, and on both accesses to Coquitlam, the Little Red Bridge out by the Lougheed Highway, they've had lots of development in lovely apartment blocks. They've done a great job in their downtown core. And also, they have developed part of the Dominion Triangle into some really nice family townhomes. So we've both done things, and I think they benefited everyone. Most people who live in the Tri-Cities live in the Tri-Cities. They sort of say, yeah, I live in Poco, I live in Port Moody, I live in Coquitlam, but basically, yeah, I live out that way. And the Coquitlam Town Centre is used by everyone, as well as the Dominion Triangle is used by everyone. Now, I remember when the Dominion Triangle was first going to be built, and one of the questions that some of the developers who were nosing around were asking my industry, which is real estate and development, was, what kind of housing's going up? What are we going to have? Any anchor that moved in there had to have a certain population, or they weren't interested in moving in. So Burke Mountain provided that population, and I am happy to say that our good neighbors have just a great area out there in the Dominion Triangle. They've not only attracted some good anchors, but they've attracted some of the big 5 banks, and that takes a lot to do, and you have to have good population to do that. I'm glad they built the overpass. I guess it was a long time coming for their citizens and for everyone who uses any roads. Roads in our Tri-Cities area are used by everyone. We built David Avenue. That cost $28 million, and it was totally our build. We did get funds from the province, and I can't remember if we got some from TransLink or not, but anyhow, we ended up putting about 11 or 12 million out there. Then when we built SkyTrain, which we took all the heck for that, and that was considerable disruption in our city, but we got SkyTrain right out at the border of Poco. They have tremendous opportunities there to build all along that border, and none of the stuff we had to go through. We also had to pay for a station that would benefit both our neighborhoods, and that cost us $20 million or so. I don't have the figures in front of me, but that's a lot of money. We never did any of those things just thinking they were for us. Everything we do in the Tri-Cities, each city, is for everyone. We have looked at the Oxford extension coming down the mountain. It is timely now to do that because of these new developments going in. The thing we have not done is the new Lincoln Bridge, which I guess in the next 10 or 20 years will be something we'll look at. That again will bring traffic right into our downtown core, but it's been on the maps and we plan for it. The thing we haven't done is the completion of the east-west route. And that used to be known as the Fremont Connector. It's been around for 50 years or more. I see Mr. Allard in the audience, and I think his dad was probably one of the founders of get that thing going over to North Van and out to Maple Ridge, and that's what it was supposed to do. So far, we've got from Port Moody into not quite, I guess we're just at Port Coquitlam, so we've got a long way to go. And that is one of the keys. And I really think as a council, we have to sit down, talk to each other, and get that done. That Fremont Connector, or whatever they're going to call it, has got to be really important. Schools was mentioned in the letter, and we have no control over the school board, but they had funds, and they redid a school in Poco instead of rebuilding or building a new one up in Burke Mountain, and that was fine. That's their decision, but we don't have any control over that. Transit, I think we, as three cities, have worked together to try and get the best we can. So I think there's lots of gain here, and for little pain. I think we've got a lot going for ourselves, and I think things that we've done have been beneficial to each other. So now I'll go into the Burke. My priority in Burke Mountain for the next year or so, while I'm still around, of course, is the Partington Creek Village. That has to go in. But the development now that we're talking about, this whole east side, is really important as well. Hazel Coy's been waiting around for years. And that development is going to have room up there for some nice single-family homes. I think it's important that they get started. The city staff has done a lot of things to do with phasing, and I agree with that. A lot of Hazel Coy will be accessed from the new Oxford connector. We have Riverwalk. Now, Riverwalk has also been around for years. Riverwalk is a really interesting piece of property. It is going to offer opportunities for housing choices we probably haven't even seen yet. It's very steep escarpment, and there's going to be some really interesting housing types in there. But one of the beauties of Riverwalk when it comes to transportation is that it can funnel out onto Pipeline Road. It will not have to go through Port Coquitlam or anywhere else. It can funnel right out into our main drag, unless, of course, they're going shopping in the Dominion Triangle, then they have to go over. But I would like to see phasing. And the reason I would like to see that is I think the Riverwalk folks have indicated in a letter that they are willing to upfront some of the development costs. It is going to take at least 2 years to get a bridge across the river anywhere before they'll even be able to start any development, but they could also get some of the services in and do latecomer agreements. So I asked a question about 2 months ago, is it better to build up a mountain or down a mountain? And we all had a good giggle over it. So here we are. We have a chance to build up a mountain and down a mountain. And I have to sit and think that if we have developers that are willing to get the servicing in and do latecomers agreements with the amount of staff that we have and how busy you are, it is not a bad thing to take a good look at. Whether we do it or not is entirely up to staff. But I'm very interested in looking at the opportunities that this whole area now presents us. And I want to thank you for all your hard work. I know how hard it's been. And I know that we have a lot of environmental opportunities in the Riverwalk area and in the escarpment too, with Crystal Falls and all the trails that everybody likes. It would be really nice to get some of that stuff settled. And it wouldn't create any more traffic over on the east side or Coast Meridian. So I thank you for letting me babble.
And I thank you for characterizing it for me. Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you. You know what? That's coincidental. I was listening with quite a lot of attention to what Councillor Reid said because she brings so much experience and knowledge to this question. And I'm really thankful for that. You put a lot of good information on the table and provided a lot of context. And that was really, really good. One of the things that you mentioned, and I think it's worth pointing out, is that of these 4 potential planning areas, the 2 westerly ones do not empty into Port Coquitlam. And so so when some comments are made about maybe 11,000 people in this planning area, and that's a concern to Port Coquitlam, you should put that in context that, well, just the 2 easterly planning areas are the potential neighborhoods, are the ones that may have some impact on Port Coquitlam. But all those impacts and the positive aspects of those have been pointed out as well. I also want to sort of have put the none of us around the council table or at the staff table is very good at predicting 15 or 20 years into the future. And this is what we've done, though. So I raise that because we've got concerns about, well, what's going to be phased first actually, what meets the criteria now, what doesn't, how things are going to develop. We really don't know. I think what I see so far, makes sense today. It'll probably make sense in a month or two from now, but 2 years from now, I really don't know. It's very hard for us to tell. But we need to have this broad plan that's actually broad and has somewhat good depth to it as well. The point is in the right direction for what we need to see, what we'd like to see happen. And so I'm satisfied with what's being done here. What we haven't talked about tonight is some of the a few of the properties on the southern edges that are those early release ones that can be your quick fix ones. I forget what the words are. Things that can actually be dealt with now. That I know that a lot of property owners would like to see development take place in order to capitalize on their long-term investments up there. That's not going to happen for the vast majority, though, for all the reasons stated in the report. One thing, I'll circle back a bit to these 4 areas and the projected population growth. I think it was 11,000 people potentially in all 4 areas if they are built out somewhere in 20 or 30 years. I want to know how that fits in with our projections. I brought this up earlier when we were talking about another subject this afternoon. So our website now says that the Northeast Coquitlam Area Plan sees a population increase of 24,000 to 30,000. Can staff tell me, does that statement include these 4 areas, or are these 4 areas on top of that? Or perhaps this figure, 24 to 30, does include the 4, but it has to be updated because of developments and densification that's taken place, unanticipated densification over the last 5 years, as there's more townhouses have gone in the lower parts than was anticipated. So what does this 24,000 to 30,000 population increase in Northeast Coquitlam Area Plan, what does that figure mean? What does it involve?
Your Worship, if I can just offer some initial comments to that, and then I'll hand it off to either Steve or Andrew to get into more of the specifics. Just going to Councillor O'Neill's last point first. I know it's a conversation this afternoon, and this has been raised before. Certainly, given the pending release of more detailed Statistics Canada census information, we're waiting for that. We're watching for that too. Our department will commit to, once that material is released, we'll do an analysis and some review and compare that back against a number of projections we've made over time, sort of back-checking, if you will, and we will come back to Council with a fuller picture about what all those numbers mean. So if I just indulge your patience on that. The other thing around the numbers too, there's a couple different numbers here. They're in Northeast Coquitlam. And setting aside, again, the lands to the west of Coquitlam River, Goodyear Creek, that's a separate piece altogether. But the Northeast Coquitlam lands, it's a number of years ago, and we often forget, but there were pockets of neighborhoods up there before the bridge was built. And so there was some initial population in Northeast Coquitlam. I see a councillor nodding his head as a longtime resident there. And then in the Northeast Coquitlam Area Plan, again, there was another number, I think that's the 24,000, that looked at the 4 neighborhoods that were planned, but there was always land sort of earmarked through the Development Reserve in what is now the Northwest Burke Vision area, and there was a certain number for that. And so there are a couple different numbers floating around, and again, when we get the more recent census information and compare that against development trends, we can give you a more accurate, precise comparison between what was projected through the planning work and where we're at right now. But maybe if either Andrew or Steve can talk more to the specific numbers.
Your Worship, to Councillor O'Neill. The 24,000 refers to the population projections for the 4 neighborhood plans on Burke Mountain, Smiling Creek, Lower and Upper Hyde Creek, and Partington Creek at full build-out. The additional population that would occur on the Burke Mountain side, on the east side, would roughly add on the mountain itself, north of those 4 neighborhood plans, roughly we're estimating around 9,000. So as Mr. MacIntosh said, we're looking at updating our numbers on the website, and this would bring the population at full build-out to around 32,000 population on Burke Mountain itself.
Now I know thank you very much. This planning area involved Riverwalk and Goodyear Creek as well. The figures you just talked about include Riverwalk, which is not really on the mountain, it's on the side of the mountain, and Goodyear Creek was certainly not on the mountain. How does that figure in?
Through the chair to Councillor O'Neill, the numbers I just provided were for the 4 neighborhood plans, so they do not include the population, estimated population growth for the future Goodyear Creek potential planning area and the Riverwalk potential planning area as well, which would roughly add about, off the top of my head, just under 3,000 residents at full build-out.
Which is the 3,000 Goodyear and Riverwalk?
Through the chair, yes.
Oh, okay. So 6,000 in Hazel Coy and Burke Mountain Creek. If you said 9,000 for all 4 of those new planning areas and 3,000 are Goodyear and Riverwalk, then it would be 6,000 for Hazel Coy and Burke Mountain Creek.
Through the chair to Councillor O'Neill, just for clarification, on page 26 of the vision document, we do have a summary of population growth. And so for Burke Mountain itself, north of the 4 neighborhood plans, that would include the Hazel Coy potential planning area with a population of just under 3,000 people, and the Burke Mountain Creek potential planning area with a population of just over 5,000 people. Also in those lands, we would include, as you referenced earlier, the early release lands or the OCP amendment lands, which have just under 1,000 people. So that's roughly 9,000 additional growth beyond the 24,000 that is included in the 4 neighborhood plans.
Okay. Hazel Coy, Burke Mountain Creek was 5,000, or just Burke Mountain Creek was 5,000?
Through the chair to Councillor O'Neill, Burke Mountain Creek alone is 5,000.
Okay. I'll have to go and maybe you can get a little report on that, trying to take all the notes, and that's good. So certainly the concern then that 11,000 new people are going to pour into Port Coquitlam isn't quite right, and the figures weren't easily accessible or maybe understandable. That's great. I think everybody's going to appreciate that clarification. I also know that now I know that under the growth plans that we've agreed to as a city, looking forward to 2041, where we see a population growth of increase of 92,500 over 2011, and I know that all of Burke Mountain plays a role in providing these needed homes. Port Coquitlam itself has a commitment or a target of 57,500, which is sort of from 57,500 in 2011 to 85,000 population in 2041. That's a sizable growth as a percentage for that community as well. And so they're going to be wrestling with these same issues that we're wrestling with. And certainly Port Coquitlam has completely surrounded either by water or by Coquitlam, with an easy access out, I guess, to from Maryhill Bypass to the bridge into Pitt Meadows. But for all of those new residents to go anywhere, they're going to have to go through another community as well, and most likely most of it through Coquitlam. So we plan for all of that, and again, it's the whole region is growing. It's needed growth for to meet the population demands. Housing is a big issue, and this is providing needed housing for a growing population, and we all have our part to play in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
What was the deadline for feedback for this Phase 3 consultation? Huh? Well, we with all the different, like the PAG, the POG, all the different organizations, what was the deadline for feedback?
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, if memory serves me correctly, it was the third week of June. Some information came in following that, and we have done our best to include it in the report as well. We provide a deadline just to encourage various organizations to get it on their agendas for their various meetings so that we can report back to our council in a timely manner.
And the window, the time frame for this Phase 3 was about how long?
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, we updated council at council and committee on May 1st, so that was the starting for that for Phase 3 public consultation following that meeting.
So approximately 6 weeks or so?
Yes, 6 to 8 weeks, yes.
And the time frame for the Phase 2 consultation, approximately how long was that?
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, it was roughly about the same, around 8 weeks. The difference with this particular phase is it's the final phase. So with Phase 2 public consultation, if information came in later than that date, we were obviously able to incorporate it easier into the project. But again, through this process, information did come in past the deadline, and we absolutely did our best to incorporate it into the council report.
Definitely, but we got UDI's feedback today in an email. There's lots of letters here, July 7th, July 9th, July 6th. And so I'm just wondering, how does this feedback get incorporated?
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, with respect to the UDI letter, it did come in today. They are a member of the project advisory group, and the project advisory group met on May 25th. So that was the last meeting they had. Unfortunately, the Urban Development Institute was unable to send a rep for that meeting. So the letter to us wasn't as expected because we had been in contact with them up to the May 25th meeting and following it.
Well, and according to our report, only 4 out of 12 members of the property advisory group were able to make that meeting. So was this a rushed process? Like, it just seems, we had way more involvement in the Phase 2 consultation than we've had in the Phase 3 consultation.
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, as often when we do these project advisory committees, we've had the same on other projects too. As the process goes on over time, oftentimes, depending on time of year, you get various attendance can drop on the committee itself. With respect to this particular one, we did follow up with all of the organizations that were unable to attend the meeting to remind them that we were seeking their feedback. Some of the organizations took us up on that, like the Coquitlam River Roundtable. Other organizations did not provide any additional feedback.
That's unfortunate. One of the letters that we got July 6th or so was from the Burke Mountain Holdings, talking about their property and what they perceived were some OCP amendment ready sites. And again, I'm assuming that came in maybe after the deadline. Any comments on their perception of their OCP amendment ready sites?
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, the OCP amendment ready sites were done at the as part of Phase 2, and we brought forward a list of criteria to identify sites that included the provision of infrastructure, and we made a number of recommendations regarding that. So they were really those early release lands that were immediately developable, that could be incorporated into an existing neighborhood plan. We would say that from the perspective of use of those criteria, these Riverwalk lines didn't meet those criteria.
And so whether that came in before the deadline or after, it's not much of a consequence.
Your Worship, to Councillor Wilson, I do not believe it would have changed our recommendation.
Now, you wouldn't know the answer to this question, I don't think, but maybe somebody back there might. TransLink's response regarding the frequency of potential bus service, I found that quite fascinating, and I'm just wondering if we got any answer like that in our original Burke Mountain consultation when we were first planning Burke Mountain. Would anybody have any idea of TransLink's thoughts on our initial consultation? Not that it relates specifically to this plan, but I'm just more curious.
Your Worship, I think actually NECAP probably precedes TransLink. I think they're at that time TransLink was not very deeply involved in transit plan like local bus services. It was only later, once they kicked off their area transit planning program and process. I recall this from my days in Port Moody. That's when they first started really looking at the bus routes that they had inherited and looking at how they expand those services. So I think more recently our work with TransLink around the area transit plan, looking at routes into the Northeast, and perhaps my colleague Mr. Dzegi can better speak to that. It's just come out in the last year or so where there has been some modest extension of transit service into there. So I think that's what we've seen so far. I think they just looked on this as the opportunity. If there's a new or an additional planning area being considered, they would look at that in due course to possibly expand their bus service up there.
Well, I think we've been told quite clearly by them that this is not a transit-oriented development, and it's not going to necessarily have frequent service. So I just want to make sure that I'm reading that correctly. When they talked about their frequency of service, it was more 30 minutes, 1 hour type frequency.
Through the chair, yes, that well, some of the community shuttles they can have a little better frequency than that. I think it's through the planning here where we're looking at a mix of housing types, trying to cluster and concentrate some of the higher densities around some of the major roads. Completing those major road and collector and arterial road loops that would lend themselves to eventual bus service into an area like that. I think that would go towards helping a more positive outcome for transit service there.
I'll leave more of a discussion on that when we actually start planning those neighborhoods. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morrison.
Thank you. I'll be fairly brief here. I think Councillor Reid addressed a lot of it in terms of just moving forward. I think staff have done a great deal of work on this. They've had a lot of consultation on it, and I appreciate the work coming forward. I'm not going to speak to the specific comments in the letter from our neighbors. I think those comments are best saved for conversations that we can have together as we work together to create solutions. I would suggest that in my short time on council, I've seen that we do take into consideration our neighbors in what we're doing and all the work that we undertake. And so I look forward to the dialogues we'll have with Port Coquitlam going forward. From a high level, this makes good sense. I get the phasing of it in terms of saying, you know what, it's a fairly broad area. We've got to take a look at the phases. We've got human capital concerns in terms of what we can do and the availability of staff resources to move things forward. There's obviously concerns with regards to the overall infrastructure necessary to support it. And so that requires the phasing. That said, I think in looking at it, probably not surprising, we've seen a number of the proponents in the area say, you know what, if you can take a look at this phasing and me first or me sooner, They're asking for that. So I would echo Councillor Reid's comments that if players are looking to come to the table and are able to move things along, that the phasing works in terms of the delivery of the infrastructure necessary, the staff resources are available to move it along in terms of where it fits in our business plans that we set each year. I'm open to having flexibility on that. It's consistent with comments we had last week when we looked at Partington Creek. You know, it's nice to say here's where we want to go, what we want to do, but let's not get down too deep into the minutia. Let's make sure that we've got the flexibility to move forward. So if there is opportunities for collaboration with that, by all means, let's investigate that. In terms of the numbers, population is there. The type of housing, to Councillor Reid's comments again, I think Riverwalk could see some very interesting things in there. This entire area, because of the slopes, we've talked about that. We talked about it today with regards to retaining walls and the need to look at the housing types and housing choices that are developed in areas. That becomes very, very important, and I think this area will continue that dialogue. So I am going to support it moving forward from here. I look forward to the discussions that we'll have as this moves forward, again, recognizing that this is a 30-year plan. So when we talk about putting in 9,000 people over the next 30 years. This isn't happening tomorrow. It's not happening with the stroke of a pen. And it's going to have a whole lot more discussion, a whole lot more dialogue, and a whole lot more detailed planning before we really get shovels in the ground. So thanks to staff for the leadership on this and bringing it forward. I look forward to supporting it and seeing where we go from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Towner.
Thank you. I echo pretty much everything that my colleagues have already said. I'm going to just speak at a very high level. I look at these things from the point of view of serving the public. I was democratically elected to help set the overall direction of our city, and we can't do that without professional, objective advice from the experts. And during the design of this, we heard from the experts on topography, drainage, environmental concerns, servicing, transportation, opportunities for land use, everything. We heard from the experts. And we also heard from the public. There was extensive consultation, and I just want to say thank you for all of that, everybody who contributed to the input and the feedback and the designing of this document. I think this is a very exciting time in our city. We have an opportunity to do our part to help accommodate the growth that we all know is coming to Metro Vancouver. It's natural growth, immigration, people living longer. It's a huge combination of people are coming. So it was discussed earlier that 11,000 or so people will live in these areas. If we didn't do this in our last greenfield area in our city, where would those 11,000 people go? That would put more pressure on the existing housing, which, as we all know, puts prices up when supply for housing exceeds, or is shortfalled by the demand. So I think it's exciting. And we heard tonight in the Ipsos Reid survey that one of the concerns in our city is housing, that there's concerns about affordable housing, but if we don't do our part for the regional growth strategy and develop areas that have been designated for decades for development, then we aren't helping to address the concerns that people are saying every year in our Ipsos Reid survey. So back to my point of view of serving the public, we have to plan for, listen to the public now, but plan for the future, for the public that will be here in the future and their families and future generations. And I think this is a very well thought out, sustainable, professional, responsible vision, and I support it 100%. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zerillo.
Thank you. Well, I have to say my favorite part of this plan is the phasing plan, 6.2. So a shout out to whoever put all the thought and rationale behind this. I think it's an incredible piece of work there and very important. As I've said before, the thing that keeps me up at night as a city councillor is the NESI chart. Thank you to engineering for wrecking my dreams going forward, because it was the engineering department that introduced me to the NESI chart. But that's something that I think about when I look at these. So I've got a few comments, but first a question about the urban containment boundary. Was there a map in here that showed the original urban containment boundary and how this plan fits into that? Was there a page? I couldn't find that page.
Your Worship, to Councillor Zavrello, page 10, figure number 8, shows the urban containment boundary and the sewage boundary.
The yellow one. Okay, so the yellow one is the urban containment and the sewer average boundary is there. Okay. All right, I'm asking because I do notice in the plan it does say some things about additional needs for expansion in water reservoirs and sewage, so thank you for that. So back to the NESIs. So my burden here is the burden on our taxpayers. And I look at this plan and I see a need for many, many things, many additions. And I would like to have seen a little bit of a more robust financial plan. In fact, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, the financial analysis, the one-pager that we saw in the presentation, I don't believe is part of this plan. Is that correct?
Your Worship, to Councillor Zavrello, we haven't included in this particular package, but it includes two pieces of information, a financial analysis and then the DCC eligible technical memo.
So I saw a reference to that somewhere in the plan here, the technical memo, but is there a reason that the financial analysis and the technical memo are not in the core, what do they call this bound neighborhood plan document that we got?
Your Worship, to Councillor Zavrello, we have placed both of those documents in the Councillor's office.
Okay.
And the technical memo has been summarized as attachment number 11, if memory serves me correctly, in the Council report.
Okay. So also some of these numbers, like I see we've got $4 million for the Zone 5 reservoir for water. Is that today's dollars? Or, I mean, I can't see that reservoir being needed for at least 10 or 15 years. How do we account for today's dollars versus what's going to be the cost in 15 years from now?
So, Your Worship, the $4 million cost figure is today's dollars.
So, I think Councillor O'Neill said it, you know, who can really foresee this far out? I'm not bad at a few years. In fact, many things I said when I came in 3 or 4 years ago have come back. And I got to say, I'm not, although I think this is an incredible piece of work, I'm not comfortable endorsing this to be the way. And I think I might have been more comfortable if there was more of a robust financial plan, but also too, the timing might have been good. Like in the phasing, if we had some timing around that phasing, I think that would be a good thing to do if this plan happens to go through tonight. It would be good to put some timing around that, because I think there's some expectation that we're going to do this stuff like right away. And I think one of the things we saw in the Ipsos read tonight was that there is some declining satisfaction amongst the residents of Coquitlam around how fast it takes to get things done. And I got to think that has everything to do with the fact that we're just so flippin' busy all the time. So I'm not going to be supporting this program today or this plan today, and my reasoning is because I think it's premature. I think that the world is changing faster than it ever has in the past, and we might need a 30,000 foot plan, but actually I'd rather take a little bit more time to see how Burke Mountain is turning out before we do that. So I appreciate the work, though. I think the phasing plan was incredible. I love the criteria. I think it makes sense, and I'd like the community to realize that this stuff can't be advanced. It can't happen any faster, because we need to have mentally healthy, committed employees in this city, and I just think it's draining them to the nth to be saying that we're going to advance something like this. So thank you.
Thank you. I will be supporting this work. The way we establish things in Coquitlam is we do a tremendous amount of planning. In fact, that's how we do it in the region. We establish a regional plan that helps identify where growth will take place. It was formerly called the Livable Region Strategic Plan, goes back decades, and now it's called the Regional Growth Strategy, or Metro 2040, Metro Vancouver 2040. That is a child of Metro Vancouver's Board of Directors and a committee at Metro Vancouver called the Regional Planning Committee. And coincidentally, I'm currently the chair of that committee, and the Port Coquitlam mayor is the chair of Metro Vancouver. This plan is entirely consistent with Metro Vancouver 2040, Shaping Our Future, which is the regional growth strategy. I'm just reading from a Metro Vancouver document. Metro Vancouver 2040, Shaping Our Future, the regional growth strategy represents the collective vision of how our region is going to accommodate the 1 million people and over 500,000 jobs that are expected to come into the region in the next 25 years. Metro 2040 was unanimously adopted in 2011 by 21 municipalities, TransLink, and the adjacent regional districts. It contains strategies to advance 5 goals related to urban development, the regional economy, the environment and climate change, housing and community amenities, and integrating land use and transportation. It was unanimously adopted, but they weren't adopted all at the same time. Municipalities adopted it by resolution. Port Coquitlam adopted it on March 14th of 2011, and Coquitlam actually was slow. We had raised concerns about Metro Vancouver 2040. We raised concerns about the RGS, and those concerns were worked through ultimately an arbitration process, a mediation process, in order to find out whether our concerns about the regional growth strategy could be accommodated. Port Coquitlam, I don't think, had any concerns. We did. And it took us 3 more months, or 4 more months actually. July 25th, 2011 was when this council, or a previous council, adopted the regional growth strategy. And the regional growth strategy has a number of goals. And goal number 1 is create a compact urban area. In order to do that, the RGS defines an urban containment boundary, which is intended to establish a stable, long-term, regionally defined area for urban development. The establishment of the urban containment boundary reinforces the protection of agricultural, conservation, and rural areas that are outside the urban containment boundary, and provides predictability for locating urban uses, major regional transportation, and infrastructure investment. That means essentially that we will be able to go forward and advance the kinds of transportation initiatives that require certainty, and there's no point building a highway or a bridge or an overpass or a transit line if we don't know where the populations will be, or where the urban development will take place. So it will have to take place within the urban containment boundary. And all of discount Goodyear Creek because it has nothing to do with most of the commentary. All of the land on the east side of the Coquitlam River, as defined in this, is inside the urban containment boundary. That is, Metro Vancouver, or the regional growth strategy, has accepted that it will be developed, has in fact defined that there is predictability for locating the urban uses, establishing regionally defined area for urban development, and that is the regionally defined area for urban development. So as we go forward and we establish for example, every community then sends in their context statement, or regional context statement. We did ours, and it was approved unanimously by Metro Vancouver's board. And it establishes the development that's going to take place. The development that's before us, or the planning that's before us, is entirely consistent with that development. In fact, one of the comments here is from Metro Vancouver. And it said, the letter says the NBV, the Northwest Burke Vision, provides a high-level land use and policy framework for guiding future anticipated growth in the north part of the city for the next 30 years, and it makes lots of statements related to the fact that it's consistent with the regional growth strategy. In fact, the only question that they raise, this is Metro Vancouver staff, not the board, was related, and I'll ask the question now, the last bullet on page, oddly enough, this says page one, oh, there it is, page 1 of 3 of the questions. You don't have to go there, I'll just read it. In addition, the NBV does not indicate if the growth estimates for the plan area are included in the overall anticipated growth for the municipality as noted in the RCS, the Regional Context Statement. It would be appreciated if this could be clarified. I believe I just got an answer from Mr. MacIntosh that yes, the growth estimates are included in the growth projections that Metro Vancouver and us have both accepted as what Coquitlam should be planning to develop, planning to accept, planning to accommodate by 2041. And I see Mr. MacIntosh nodding that yes, the planning area that's before us now, and the question that's before us tonight, is consistent and includes the population that we've committed to figuring out how to accommodate. The challenge before us is how do we reconcile the needs of one community with the needs of another, with adjacent communities. And we have tried hard in this community and the neighboring communities. I've even gone on a motorhome tour with them. But we have gotten together as councils for the first time, perhaps in the history of the Tri-Cities, since 2013 since 1913. 1913, of course, 1912, and right up until March or April of 1913 when votes were taken. This was all one community. The Tri-Cities was the district of Coquitlam. And in 1913, for a variety of reasons, some landowners in Port Coquitlam and some landowners in Port Moody decided to separate themselves as groups from district of Coquitlam. I was a little bit inaccurate in that Fraser Mills was a separate community as well. But and today, because of that geopolitical reality of from 103 or 104 years ago, the borders are odd. The borders don't make a lot of sense. And if the borders weren't there, I always contemplate when we're planning things is if the borders weren't there, what would we do? For example, if the border wasn't there, would we build the David Bridge? Well, yes, we would. If the border weren't there, would we build the Lincoln Bridge? Yes, we probably would. Does the fact that they're different communities make a difference to the way we lay out our community? And I think that for the benefit of our residents who don't consider themselves always I don't want to go that way because that goes into Port Coquitlam. We should be laying out our community as though the boundaries didn't exist. When Port Coquitlam went before TransLink to have, at that point, almost 2/3 of the project funded by the region, one of the arguments was the fact that it was a regional major road. It was a major road with regional implications. Not a road that started and ended in Port Coquitlam, but a road that clearly connected communities and connected significant populations, or there's no point having a major highway to connect it. If we wanted to connect two parts of Coquitlam, if we wanted to build a little overpass to connect Falcon with Dewdney Trunk on the other side of the train tracks, for example, I don't think we'd be able to get TransLink funding because we're only connecting Coquitlam to Coquitlam. But if we're connecting Coquitlam to another community, we can get funding. And that was the basis upon which TransLink made the decision to fund, at that point, $60 million of the total of almost $100 million of project cost estimated at that time. The remainder would be made up 2/3 of DCCs funded by DCCs out of Port Coquitlam. And so that is a regional connection, and so I recognize frustrations, and I recognize the challenges that the residents along that corridor undoubtedly feel that the newcomers to our region are causing congestion. We always have to work with communities to our neighbors and other property owners, other residents, to identify those challenges and also to mitigate them as much as possible. And that is my hope, that we can move forward in continuing, as we have in the past, work with other councils and staff to staff to try to find the issues and allay the concerns as much as possible. But one of the concerns we can't allay is that this region desperately needs housing. The Ipsos Reid survey at the beginning has pointed out that the second largest of the social issues facing, and in fact the largest complaint we hear about as council, is the cost and availability of housing. We're going to have a million people by every projection we've read, including the projections in the urban containment or the regional growth strategy. We're going to have a million more people in the next 25 years. And if we don't accommodate them, there's two choices. We can accommodate them, or we can build less housing than is needed by those million newcomers. Some of those million will settle somewhere else, but some of them will displace our kids, because my kids will end up in Calgary or in Kamloops. My grandkids will end up in Manitoba, because they cannot afford to live in the region they grew up in. I don't want us to be a region of wealthy. I don't want us to be a region that whose population has displaced the population that was here before, and that was the purpose of the regional growth strategy in the first place, was how do we create a compact region without sprawl and accommodate an extra million people. And so we identified land that was going to be developed. We identified other land that was going to be densified, some of it intensely because of SkyTrain, for example. And now it's our job. Now it's our job to go forward and work on really good planning principles as demonstrated in this plan. Really good planning principles, really good engineering principles, really focus a lot of attention on those things we can focus as much attention on as possible because they're within our realm. And fight hard for those things that aren't within our realm, like transit and schools. Those are the two. Those incidentally appear in some of the concerns about this. But nonetheless, this is an absolutely well-designed plan. Its population was always anticipated to be up in this area. The population that's included in this is a population that was anticipated in our regional context statement. And I, in that regard, think it's entirely appropriate that we approve this. I'm going to read one more thing and then I'm done. And I almost heard applause here. Because it's a quote in the media. And I know sometimes the media misconstrues a comment or something. The media quoted this, suggesting that if the vision for Northwest Burke goes ahead as planned, Mayor Moore says that would mean tens of thousands more people living on the mountain. And of course, that couldn't be what he meant, because I know he knows that that's not the case. This vision essentially is the vision that it's incorporated in the grander vision that's always been here. There may be a few thousand one way or the other, but we cannot say that this is tens of thousands more population. This is simply putting a little finer point on planning areas that have always been designated for urban development. Our regional growth strategy includes an urban containment boundary, as I started with, that will contain the development, and that leaves it up to the rest of us. How do we make it so that the area within that boundary now is livable and contains the population that we need to contain in this region? And I'm proud of the work that's gone on here. I'm proud of the work we're doing in densifying other parts of Coquitlam. I know density is a bad word for many, but it's necessary in the context of the future livability of this region. And I commit, and I know that Council commits, to continuing to work with Port Coquitlam and our other neighbors on mitigating challenges associated with their development on us and our development on them. And I said that was the last thing, but this is the final thing. Coquitlam has more throughput through traffic, that is, more traffic that enters and exits our community going somewhere else than any other community of the 22 in the region. No other community in Metro Vancouver has more traffic that doesn't stop. It goes through our community. We've got almost 30 lanes east and west of essentially highway that goes through our community and carries people from, and we accommodate that. We allow it. We have to. We're in the middle of the region. So Port Coquitlam, almost everybody from Port Coquitlam goes through Coquitlam in order to get somewhere. Coquitlam, we go through Port Moody or Burnaby or New Westminster or Surrey or Port Coquitlam. But we all have those challenges, and I want us to continue to work on them. I want to make sure that we accommodate the movement of traffic and the other challenges associated with development across the region. And I commit to continuing to work with our neighbors to mitigate the challenges that they face. And I want to acknowledge the applause that I'm getting from members of council. No, I'm done now. The question is, the proposed Northwest Burke Vision document. Sorry? Can we split what way? Okay. All in favor? All opposed? Councillor Zerillo is opposed. The motion carries.
Item 10 pertains to the Housing Choices Program Review, proposed scope and process. Staff recommendations that Council endorse the proposed scope and process as outlined in the report before you, and direct staff to proceed with the review of the Housing Choices Program. We have introductory comments by the General Manager of Planning and Development.
Moved by Councillor Zerillo, second by Councillor Rasmussen. Councillor Rasmussen.
After the introduction.
Oh, you're going to let the introduction take place? Go ahead.
Your Worship, I'll be very, very brief in my comments. The hour is late.
I don't like people that talk a long time.
I'll leave that one alone. No, this is a piece of work we've been intending to get to. It's timely. The city's Housing Choices Program was put in place back in 2011, and there's been a number of sites that developed under that Housing Choices Program. Actually, technically, it's our neighborhood attached residential land use designation. There's been a number of projects, but also we note there's been a trend towards a certain typology now, more of the two-lot splits and getting away from some of the more innovative infill, duplex, triplex, fourplexes I think we originally hoped for. But to be honest, too, we've heard some concerns raised as well, and staff ourselves, we have some questions around some of the difficulties in processing these applications. So it's a review I think is quite timely to get on with. It was on the business plan. But also we've seized the opportunity to combine this with a project under the city's leadership program. So it enables us to have a leadership candidate take this on, but that's been broadened to be a bit of a team. So that team has prepared this report tonight and are here and can speak to it in more detail than me. And we're just want to check in with council. If you support this, we'd like to get on with this work. It's broken into 3 phases, and we'll be reporting back by the end of the year on the first phase results.
Thank you. Councillor Rasmussen.
Well, thank you. I'm going to support this. I just have a question. I mentioned this before in regards to the Housing Choices Program, and we heard some of it recently on the people on the Coquitlam Lougheed area plan about the NAR and wanting town housing. And when I want to look at this review and I talk about, we have the TDS, which takes a core and a shoulder area along there. And I really think that within the shoulder areas, you shouldn't have NAR within that area, because I believe townhousing is a better land use form. But I also would think that even outside the shoulder area, we should have another buffer area before we apply neighborhood attached residential that we could keep for future potential townhousing. Because to me, townhousing is a better land use form. I think we also talked to some of the people about the Miller experiment on that street and how they feel that down their street wouldn't work well living in that neighborhood there. And that they are all proposing that area, that really a townhousing provides better land use, better parking in that area. So I think as you do this review, I'd just like you to look at that aspect of NAR with the TDS, the shoulder areas, and even outside the shoulder area, because if you allow neighborhood attached residential, it will make it then later harder to assemble properties to create townhousing development. So that's my one concern. I'd just like you to take that away and consider that within the housing choices review. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marsden.
Thank you. Absolutely going to support this going forward. We have talked about it a fair bit, as Councillor Asmundson has just indicated. Question for staff with regards to the various phases. Do you foresee changes coming or being recommended in conjunction with the completion of each phase? Or do you see that all three phases will be complete and then a comprehensive report saying here's all the recommended changes?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Marsden, it's the former. So unlike a traditional long-range planning process where you might have three phases that culminate in one deliverable at the end, each phase would have its own deliverables that would advance various aspects of the Housing Choices Update.
Okay, so then we would anticipate the research completed by the end of this year. Next year we would see discussion or research around the expansion and the refinement and recommended changes in that regard at that time, correct?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Marsden, that is correct.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. I think that's absolutely the way to go. I will also add my voice to echo Councillor Asmundson's comments with regards to utilization of townhouse options. Really, the looking at those, the densification, I've said before, the densification of corridors, that gentle densification is something we absolutely have to look at. In Metro Vancouver, there's a significant undersupply of townhome options. Very, very glad to see that last Monday we approved development permits on, I believe it was 44 townhouse units. Now the question is how quickly can we get the building permits issued, get those shovels in the ground, and actually get those things to market to help address the supply needs. So I think as we go through here, I'm certainly going to be looking to see what options do we have available to take a look at, say, how can we tastefully introduce townhouse options into the characters of some of our older established neighborhoods and see them welcomed by the residents, not just those looking at big area changes, but within the existing residents. So I'm going to support this completely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've drafted up 11 points that I wanted to make here, but I see you have them all listed as the bullets on page 2, so I'll just go right to the vote. All in favor? All opposed? Carries unanimously. You turn your microphone on, please. You don't have to, but if you're going to excuse yourself, you do have to.
I need to excuse myself from the next item regarding home on Rochester because I have agency on a property within close proximity.
Thank you. Councillor Reid excuses herself. Mr. Clerk.
Your Worship. Item 11 is a follow-up to the temporary protection order heritage for the Pollard residence, which is located at 609 Rochester Avenue. Staff recommendations that Council receive the report for you for information in follow-up to the temporary protection order, which was placed on the real property situated at 609 Rochester Avenue.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, second by Councillor Towner. I just wanted to express how happy I am that, first of all, that staff identified this and brought it to council But secondly, that the owners of the property have now apparently worked quite cooperatively with staff and with a prospective purchaser, and are now in a position, I think they were modest about the value, the heritage value of the home that they cherished for so many years, and it's so. I mean, I have fallen in love with it even more. I've only seen the outside before, but seeing these magnificent photos of the inside of a home, it suggests it's a home that's indeed worth protection. And so I am thankful that it's come back to us so quickly and with such a positive prospect for success in retention of this important piece of Coquitlam history, 108 years old. Councillor Asmussen.
Well, thank you, and I'll echo those comments when I saw the pictures of this on the inside and the outside. This is a very beautiful home that needs preserving. The interior has some simply beautiful features that have been very well kept over the years, so it's shown that this house has had good care taken to it. My one question, though, comes down to the agreement to be taken over, and I understand by an email today that's been moved up till September somewhat. Now, my question is, the house and this protection, once this developer takes over ownership of the land, does that then invoke, if it's not an agreement in place or development in place, that he can then demolish the house? Or is this just simply a thing he's taking over possession and we will continue to work with him and he's agreed to save the house going forward?
Your Worship, through the chair, more the latter, but a couple of comments leading up to that. First, we're very, very pleased to be here with this positive outcome too. It's great. And I really want to recognize and commend both the property owners and we talked to a number of local developers that specialized in the heritage area, and a lot of interest. In the end, one party had a particular interest, and actually has kind of an interesting track record of other heritage projects around the region, which I wasn't aware of. So that was quite gratifying. The timeline clarification, there was a little bit of a misunderstanding or misreading of the dates. It's a fairly tight timeline we're working to here. And so just to a little dose of reality, we're not at the finish line yet. We're doing well, but we're not there quite yet. What was negotiated apparently between the vendor, the property owners, and this prospective developer, the purchaser, as a due diligence period to be completed by September 19th, which is a fairly short timeline. And I'll come back to that in a minute. If the prospective developer, the purchaser, satisfies himself by that date, has done his due diligence, it's a go. They will then have a month then till October 19th to complete the sale. So it's a fairly short clock that they're working to. The developer is, the reason they're interested in this property is the house, but also some of the opportunities and flexibility that the city provides under our HRA, Heritage Revitalization Agreement program, and they see huge potential, obviously, in retaining the house, doing it up, and it is a wonderful, wonderful building. But then, as we've seen with other projects, and this one will actually be neat because it'll be a little larger scale. There'll be infill, maybe some townhouse, maybe some apartment, located around that house in a complex, and so it could be a pretty exciting project. Now that's all getting out ahead of us. Right now, what they're trying to do is go through and just verify what the basic requirements would be to go ahead with the development, the servicing and frontage, what sort of development, what the development concept may look like, what sort of yield, so they can make that decision whether they want to proceed with the purchase, because it's not inexpensive, by September 19th.
I guess my concern, though, is that what is the protection on the house moving forward? If they don't complete this deal, we had a 60-day restriction on a demolition order. If this falls apart to somebody else, how do we protect the house moving forward?
I And through the chair, I think that's a worst-case scenario. And I think the odds of that are much slighter than they were before. If for some unforeseen reason, this particular arrangement falls apart, we would then be back talking with the property owner to see if there's not another party that might take up the interest in it. I think as laid out in the report, we've kind of had our one shot at the 60-day temporary hold. That's under legislation. The municipality can only do that once without the property owner's permission. So I think if things fall apart after the 19th, we'd be in a position where we'd be hopefully talking with and convincing the property owner to look at some other developer option that would see that structure be retained.
Well, I hope we can retain. I would hate to lose this house, and from what we've seen here. So those are just some of my thoughts and concerns, and I want this to succeed because I think this is truly a beautiful house, and I just wanted to echo some of my potential concerns and thoughts. So I thank you for your answers.
Yeah. And if I could just add to that, Your Worship, and just to inject a little bit of positive thinking to that, it's not just this prospective developer, staff, council, but also the property owners, I think, have a real sincere interest in seeing this house being retained and given new life. They're very, very proud of that building.
Thank you.
Yep. Outstanding. So, the question is receipt, I think. Receipt?
Receipt as an update. Receipt for information and follow-up.
Receipt, there it is. I was just looking for the word. Thank you. That question is receipt. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
I will just go collect Councillor Reid.
It has been pointed out that the verb collect has several meanings, and we're perhaps suggesting the word invite. I don't know.
Return with.
Yes, return with her. The prodigal counselor may read.
Now I'm afraid to leave the room to do that if those conversations happen. Item 12 concerns parking requirements for ground-oriented multifamily housing and secondary suites and single-family housing. This is zoning amendment bylaw number 4764 as amended. Staff recommendations that council amend City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4764 by removing the proposed provisions related to a non-tandem parking space for a secondary suite in a single-family house, and by increasing the minimum lot width for front-loaded RS7 and RS8 lots as shown on the black line copy of the amended bylaw, which is attachment 1 to the report before you. And that council gives second, third, and fourth and final readings to City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4764 as amended.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, second by Councillor Asmussen. Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you. A couple of things to say, but first, I was not confused by attachment 1 and the black-lined things there, but the recommendation number 1, I think, is very confusingly worded, because my understanding of what the black-lined bylaw does, and the confusion comes in the third line. It says, and by increasing. Isn't what the amendment doing is it's removing it's removing the provisions related to A, a non-tandem parking space, and B, an increase in the minimum lot size. Isn't that what it's doing?
Excuse me, through the chair to Councillor O'Neill, yes, it's eliminating or proposing to eliminate both of those.
Right. Okay.
Provisions.
So how the clerk read it today was that this amendment will amend it by removing this and by increasing the minimum lot size, but it's not doing it. It's removing the non-tandem and increase and also removing the proposed increase in minimum lot. So it's very confusingly worded, and I bet you the clerk was even confused about that when he read it. And when I first read it, I was very confused as well. So maybe this reflects the fact that this has been back and forth and confusing subject for council and for staff, but that's a poorly worded recommendation and could very easily be misconstrued by the public or maybe even the courts if it got there. I have no idea.
Well, I must say that I wasn't confused at all until you explained it to me.
Really? Oh, well, first time I read it, I went, wait a minute, that's not what we were supposed to be voting on. We weren't supposed to be voting in favor of an increase in minimum lot size. So that's
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
no. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, we're supposed to be voting on that, but they are removing this amendment is to remove the non-tandem parking space for secondary suite and to also remove the proposed, what it was originally in the first draft, it was going to increase the minimum lot size. Now, under this, what's black lined here in attachment 1, that minimum lot size is now scrolling that back. So what we're doing is, right? Okay.
Mr. Clerk, I trust you.
In consultation with Planning and Development staff, what I'd like to propose in terms of a friendly amendment, let's say, is that we remove the words "by increasing" and substitute the words "the proposed increase" to the.
There you go. Yeah, exactly.
If that is acceptable to council, we will record that as the moved motion. Yep. In a single-family house and the proposed increase to the minimum lot width for front-loaded RS7 and RS8.
Okay, good. So some punctuation would be better, or an A bracket, B bracket might be better, but this is much better than the original wording.
Well, by moving the proposed provisions relates to both clauses.
That's right. So the by removing now refers to everything after, but it looked like using the same structure by increasing, you had two different things that we're doing. So I'm glad, thank you for seeing that the way I saw it, and perhaps avoiding future confusion. And I hope this hasn't confused it more for people. A general comment, that was an interesting Ipsos Reid poll today. And we saw all the different issues.
Sorry.
No, this is exactly on here, on still speaking, on parking.
I'm sure the whole item is parking. I'm back on the proposed amendment to the wording.
We haven't agreed to that yet?
We haven't agreed to it, but I'm also...
sorry.
You want to remove the minimum lot width for front-loaded RS7. Remove them? Well, it didn't mention increase.
Okay, well, let me explain here what happened. So now staff is giving council the option with this now clearly worded recommendation 1 to limit the bylaw changes that we've been talking about for several months only to townhouses and not to the not forcing single-family homes, to especially the smaller ones up on the narrow lots up on Coquitlam, up in Burke Mountain. They are saying that with number 1, we now have the option to say, yeah, let's just throw that out, because you know what? They heard a lot of pushback from that at council last time. Indeed, that was the original staff recommendation several months ago when we dealt with that in committee. So they're giving us the option, if we agree with number 1, to just have the bylaw change, change only the townhouse parking provisions to say that everything has to have 2 spaces, but 33% of those 2 spaces can be in tandem. That would be if we agree to 1 and 2, that would be the only change we're making. Now that's...
Except we've also removed minimum lot widths for RS7 and RS8. I don't think you meant to do that. I think you meant to remove the proposed increased in the minimum lot width.
He's removing... Well, look at the black line.
Oh, no, but that's not, the motion
Oh, okay, well, I'm reading it differently. I'm reading it same.
The black line scratches through a provision that increased.
Right.
You're not removing.
Increasing in order to provide.
I'm just trying to be
parking space.
But
if we don't want that extra parking space now,
I get
we don't
what
need the extra width.
I know what you're saying. I'm just saying I think we need two other words, and that is removing the proposed increase in. Because we're not removing the minimum lot width, or even the proposed minimum lot.
I thought that was there, I'm sorry.
That was.
That was there.
That's not what you read.
Yes, it was.
I heard it.
The proposed text was removing the words by increasing and substituting the words the proposed increase to the.
I didn't hear that part. Okay. So I asked the question a number of times, and you kept pontificating in other ways about how, what I understand what you meant.
Sorry.
But clearly I wasn't making myself clear. Okay. So if we accept this as currently worded, as proposed to be worded, we're going to deal with an amendment in a second. As you said, it only deals with townhouses. It drops RS7 and RS8 front-loaded. Okay. You have to turn your microphone on. Councillor Asmussen.
Now, when we went to public hearing, the reason this, well,
At the floor, and I was still.
this is just a point of information on.
No, what you told me there wasn't a point of information. I thought he'd been finished speaking, but I'll leave the floor with Councillor O'Neill.
I wanted to speak, unless you wanted to have a second round, but I wanted to speak on the overall issue as well.
Well, right now we're dealing with an amendment.
Just on the amendment. Okay, well, come back to me.
We haven't moved the amendment yet.
Okay, fine.
So if someone moves the amendment.
I'll move the amendment.
The amendment is to change those words to the proposed increase in. Councillor Asmussen, do you have anything on the amendment?
My only question was on the amendment was that Councillor Hodge, why this come back, is required that this be broken into separated so we can vote on each item separately rather than as a block, because he wanted to vote for one part of it, but he didn't want to be tied into the whole thing. And I thought that's under the background that this was that's why this was deferred and to come back to us. That's what Craig had asked for, separation. That's what Craig had asked for, and that's why
He's not proposing separation because we can only separate a recommendation, and the recommendation doesn't include the 4 items in a separatable way.
But that was my.
Yep.
I thought that's why when we sent it back.
You're going to be able to cherry pick what we wanted, yeah.
And that's what Craig wanted, because he didn't want to vote on something that he thought one part would be okay and the other part he didn't want to support because it was tied together. So I thought when this came back, it was supposed to be separated out, that we could vote on it in those separated sections.
Correct. You're right. That was my memory as well.
Yeah. And I don't see this recommendation meeting that ask, even if we do it through the amendment. I don't know if we have to send this back for the 31st, but I don't think we can vote on this now. I think it would be better if Craig Hodges, Mr. Councillor Hodges here. But that was the whole reason we didn't vote on it that night. And why we don't have to have a public hearings, we made our comments that night to this issue, so we didn't have to worry about new information coming in to this. So does this have to be deferred for staff to go back and do that separation of items in the recommendation?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, if we amend the wording, and that has nothing to do with the amendment that's on the floor, but I'll let you finish. If we amend the wording on this and then vote on one, that eliminates 2 of these bullets if one is accepted. Because one would then say, we're not touching single family, we're not touching RS7 and RS8. Now, the only questions before council then would be number 1 and 2 in the backgrounder,
okay,
which are the multifamily side. And then we would have to contemplate whether, in fact, there's enough support for 1 and 2 here. We could even straw poll it here to find out whether or not there's enough support, even taking into account Councillor Hodge. I don't want to blindside a councillor. We've always said that if a council member is legitimately absent, we don't try to, on an issue that he has spoken or he or she has spoken out, about a lot, we're not going to determine the final conclusion while they're gone. So why don't we do this? The motion is to amend. It's been seconded?
Yes, it has been seconded by Councillor Marsden.
Okay. Is there any further discussion on the amendment, which would just change the wording so it's clearer? All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. So there was a request to separate. We can only separate the recommendations. So recommendation 1, we can vote on it. If recommendation 1 passes, and I would say, since if it tied, that would be, it's going to fail anyway, and it would have failed with Councillor, I think with Councillor, I'm not sure. Anyway, Craig's in favor of it. Okay. Well, it will. So then, if I call the vote and it fails on a tie, I'll bring it back when Councillor well, I will bring it back. Okay. If it passes, then Council has spoken on 1 that they just don't want to deal with the RS7 and RS8. Okay. So discussion. Okay. Right now, we've amended 1. There was a request by Councillor Zerillo to separate. We always do when a council member requests separation. So we're dealing only with 1, and Councillor Zerillo on recommendation number 1. Councillor Zerillo on recommendation number 1.
Sorry, I thought you were saying. Okay, so just to be clear, I called for separation on the NBV, not on this one. So what I remember from this when it came last time was there was 4 bullets in there that, and we said, well, we could support 1 and 2, but we couldn't support 4, and we were told that the whole bylaw would have to go back for public hearing if we made changes. So I'm just trying to understand. I totally agree with what Councillor O'Neill was saying. This is basically saying the only thing we're addressing is the townhouse parking, which I know many of us don't want to do, but what is going to make this thing have to go back to public hearing? Because I think that's what we're trying to avoid. So how do we handle this so it doesn't go back to another public hearing, but it still accommodates the suite parking, which I think all of us care about?
Your Worship,
MacIntosh.
If I could, and just to recap, the challenge at this point is the public hearing is closed, right. And so oddly enough, you can remove regulation, propose regulation that's a change from the bylaw. You can't make changes more restrictive than the bylaw is now. Okay, and so
more restrictive than the bylaw as proposed.
Yes, and the existing bylaw, that was not what was considered at the public hearing. So at this point, if I'm understanding what council is asking for.
Sorry, I hate to do this. Would you mind just taking your seat for a second? We just have to have a motion to extend past 10:30. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Asmundson, O'Neill, all in favor, opposed, 2/3. We have it. Thank you. Mr. MacIntosh.
Yeah. If what I understand is, from the last time this was discussed, that there seemed to be the interest on this part of the proposed bylaw. It's in number 1. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we've added 2 elements in one part of a motion. There's the non-tandem and also the minimum lot width. So if I'm understanding what council is looking for is to be able to vote on each of those items separately. That was the idea. Yes, okay. I guess a further amendment to that first motion could be broken into a 1A and a 1B based on the additional wording that the city clerk added. So it would be to amend City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw by colon A would be removing the proposed revisions related to non-tenant parking space for secondary suite in a single-family house, and then 1B would be, and by removing the increased minimum lot width. So you'd actually be able to split out 1A, 1B. If we can do that on the floor right now, then that would give you your full ability to separate the various motions.
Yeah, I'm comfortable separating it that way. That's not changing anything. It's just simply separating it, and the two provisions that we're referring to in the current thing, it simply says, as shown on the black line copy, are very distinct sections. So it doesn't, we would then say the relevant section as shown on the black line copy. So I don't have a problem doing it either way. Sending it back to staff for a clearer version at a time when someone else is here, when all of council is here potentially, or doing it tonight.
Your Worship, council, or staff is comfortable. We've been at this for a while, and I certainly respect with one council member not here tonight, and there's been a little bit of confusion about this. If it's a matter of bringing this back again at the next meeting, July 31st, we can do that. It'll be written 1, 2, 3, 4. Very clear.
Councillor Asmussen moves referral to staff, seconded by Councillor Reid. Staff will have committed to returning it for a Wednesday signature for next Monday. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously or silently. That was 2/3 of those who attended. If someone steps out, I can't ask for it. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Next item, item 13, concerns Evergreen Cultural Center signage. Staff recommendations that Council authorize funding of $65,000 for the purchase and installation of one reader board sign and one facility sign for the Evergreen Cultural Center to be funded from the Infrastructure Reserve. This funding is in addition to the $25,000 already provided to the city from the province of British Columbia.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, seconded by Councillor Asmussen. Could it include a small amount for some signage to divert people from using the back parking lot for dropping off and picking up after SkyTrain? I don't know. That's a rhetorical question. Anybody else? Seeing none. All in favor? All opposed? You may go home now. Motion carries unanimously. If we'd have noticed you, we would have pulled it up closer.
Moving on to item 14, it's an application for new taxi licenses by Queen City Taxi Limited. Staff recommendations, council support Queen City Taxi Limited's application to the Passenger Transportation Board for 4 additional taxi licenses, one of which is an accessible taxi, and 2, the staff be instructed to forward a copy of this report and the council resolution to the Passenger Transportation Board.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 15 pertains to the North Road Maintenance and Cost Sharing Agreement. Staff recommendations that council authorize the mayor and city clerk to execute on behalf of the city of Coquitlam agreement with the city of Burnaby for the maintenance of North Road as set out in the report before you. And 2, pursuant to Section 13 of the Community Charter, consent to the city of Burnaby providing North Road maintenance services in Coquitlam.
Moved by Councillor Tanner, seconded by Councillor Asmussen. Councillor Asmussen.
Glad to see this before us. I like the division, how they're going to do the maintenance on it. I also like the idea of us taking over the signalization of the lighting along North Road. I drive that road quite a bit. The Cochrane, Cameron, the left turn signals where no cars are there. At Foster, the lights being extended longer on Foster. So I think our staff and Mr. Mooney will be able to do a better job on creating traffic flow along.
Okay. It's a public meeting.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, I will say, though, that I often ride my bike up from the Cameron, from the coast, or the Central Valley Greenway. And on Cameron, if you're at the bottom of the hill and the light turns green up at the top of the hill, you think, well, I'll wait for the next light. But you can see the countdown for the walk signal, which is, it starts at 72, I think. It counts down. Because you can just pedal all your way up and it's still green. So, sorry, it's an anecdote, yes. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 16 pertains to the 2017 Facility Upgrade Program funding transfer. Staff recommendations that Council approve a transfer of $1.3 million from the Building Component Replacement Reserve to the Facility Upgrade Program.
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, seconded by Councillor Zerillo. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Your Worship and members of Council, that is the last formal item on this agenda.
Second.
You know, we don't have to fight. A motion to adjourn by Councillor O'Neill, seconded by Councillor Asmussen. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
The audience out there.
I'll now open the floor to questions on tonight's agenda from any members of the audience. Any questions? Any questions? Seeing none, I thank everyone for coming. All have a good evening. Actually,
Clerk has a question.
yes, please. What is your question?
The need for the motion to extend past 10:30 when we finished just before.
We didn't finish just before. We finished at 10:32.